Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto Team 7 meets Team rwby. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by DRAG0N5 on and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Why? Thud. 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 As intangible and unstoppable as the wind which coated it, the blade cuts through flesh and bone like a chainsaw through paper and cardboard. Each swing rains crimson across the floors, a tempest unleashed within the unsuspecting compound. A man dressed in light armor swings at the storm with a short sword. He sways around the swing naturally, lazily stabbing the kunai in his left hand at the side of the man's head. There is no power behind the stab. Made with minimal effort, it is almost like a child playfully swinging their arms in the free breeze. For all appearances, there should be nowhere near enough force for even the tip of the sharpened knife to do anything more than leave a slight bruise on the side of the man's head. Yet. A sickening squelch, more blood and gore to add to the deluge. The tip of the kunai sinks into the man's head, coming out the other side like a fleeting thought. With a jerk of his wrist, he vindictively snaps the man's neck for good measure, freeing his weapon and flicking the human stain out of his way. The second man in armor lets out a furious cry. It is not one of anger or vengeance or even grief for his fallen comrade. It is the cry of a cornered animal. A trapped rat. Of prey caged by an overwhelming predator. Faced with the insurmountable, the man swings his sword in a frenzied desperation. Unmoved by the armored man's fear, the ninjato in his right hand traces an arc of black steel. The rat falls, his upper half landing a few feet away from his lower. Sparse moonlight reflects off the edge of the blade, not a single speck of blood dirtying the length of tempered steel. Who could sully a soul already galvanized? Picking his way carefully as not to step in any of the carrion flooding the room, they leave this building and move on to the next. There he finds a gathering of 20 men and women, all armed and armored. The same number that had been in the previous building. Weapons nor protection had helped them, either. Blue eyes refrozen for this task swept across the group of mercenaries from behind a mask as dark as shadows. His arm blurs. In the darkness of the night, the kunai is as invisible it flies across the room. With a whispered noise, it buries itself deep into the skull of the man who was about to speak. The man collapses, blood pooling beneath him while the rest of the mercenaries look to him in horror. Please, we'll give you anything you want. Another mercenary says, this one's fear overriding his anger. Why are you doing this? His voice is superficially calm and he tries to be as uncaring as an imminent hurricane. But the undercurrent of anger is all too obvious to hear. This is no natural disaster or angry god to be appeased, he is vengeance incarnate. You'd probably be in a pretty bad mood if someone you cared about went missing, wouldn't you? The mercenary's eyes widen. Then his head hits the floor, his body following soon after, and realization frozen on the decapitated face. I only need one mouth to talk, he explains, standing over the headless corpse. The rest of the mercenaries back away with horror and fear clouding their expressions. The rest of you? Well, you can help me blow off some steam. Clarity. In another room filled with a platoon of guards, a girl sits calmly on a heedlessly placed folding chair. There is nothing to indicate her distress or even status as a prisoner, except for the shackles on her wrists and a handful of weapons hovering around her head. He will come for me, you know, she speaks, breaking the tense silence and looking at the only other person sitting in the room. They turn to look at the young girl with a piercing gaze. But her silver eyes like blades hold no fear. Only determination and sadness. He will come, she repeats. And he's going to kill you. There was no joy with this proclamation, only sadness and dispatched acceptance at what is to come. What makes you think you're so important to him? In spite of the sorrow, with this question comes smugness and a wry smirk. She lifts up her hand and pulls away the left shoulder of her kimono. What he sees shocks him. The fox sits on her moon-pale skin with its head pointed towards the sky and its mouth open wide. Within that gaping maw is perched a perfect rose, delicate petals caressed by the bared fangs. Clarity. Now. They stood no chance. It had been an absolute massacre. The only survivor was a woman whom was now fixed in his gaze. The boy didn't have so much as a blonde strand of hair out of place. The only sign he had even been in a fight was the ripped sleeve of his left arm. He tore the scrap of cloth off, revealing a tattoo of a rose opening to a silver moonlight. Nestled in its soft embrace is a fox. Collapsed on the floor, the woman cowers as if a specter of death itself stands before her. If only she could be so lucky. The teen crouches before her and removes his mask, the spotless blade in his right hand gleaming with a deadly promise. Where is my wife? The first time they met was in a crowd. In the long run, nothing about it seemed special. Neither of them even remembered it until years later, long after they would meet again. She had just witnessed her uncle take down a crook with relative ease. He had just witnessed his sensei take a man's life with no remorse. That was so cool, Uncle Quo. Ruby squealed. She still had trouble with hard sounds. I'm gonna do stuff like that when I'm old. Oh, really now? The huntsman wondered, looking at his niece. Yeah, I'm gonna be like Wah. And yeah. The child cheered, making fighting noises and doing her best to mime what she had just witnessed. Though his heart was as shriveled as his liver, the huntsman chuckled at the parody of his very serious act. Then he noticed the girl had gone silent. He looked at her, tracing her line of sight to a small ice cream stand, and chuckled once again at her manic attention. Do you want some? Crow asked. The young girl nodded her head vigorously. Alright, I gotta stay here and talk to the police. So just to the stand and back, understand? The peppy child chirped in happiness and nodded again with her seemingly limitless energy. Alright, here you go, Kid Crow smiled, handing the girl lean to get what she wanted. No more than 2 scoops though, or your father will kill me. She was going to get 3. This was a foregone conclusion. We don't do this lightly, the man said, looking down at the blonde. I understand, Naruto responded. No, you don't. The man denied airily with his one visible eye. Not yet anyway, but you will in time. When will that be? The boy asked with schooled patience. Depends on the person, the man continued as he wiped the blood off the blade while the two walked out of the alleyway. As made the blade vanish and they blended back into the crowd, the killer in training spotted a small stand. Decorations as cloying as the treat it peddled, the novelty was impossible to resist. Would you like some? Naruto looked up at his current instructor but didn't respond. The man chuckled to himself at the display, having expected it. Here, he handed the boy a few lean. Be quick, he ordered lazily. Naruto hesitated before nodding and heading off towards the stand. The two ended up in line next to each other. Ruby was vibrating in place as she waited her turn, while Naruto stood behind her as still as the sidewalk itself. They were the only 2 children in line without adult supervision, but they both knew they were safe. Her eagerness taking her in that direction, Ruby turned to find the boy behind her. I like yo tail. Saying the first thing that came to her mind, she was already entranced by it, watching as it swayed side to side. Naruto looked at the girl, not expecting to have to hold a conversation with someone he didn't know. I wish I had one, she moaned, still immune to her gaucheness. I could use it as a pillow, and it would be super soft. As if he might turn invisible by holding still without talking, Naruto just kept staring. But that didn't seem to deter the girl at all. What ice cream do you like? The girl asked, looking for any kind of distraction since she had to wait. Ice cream? The boy blinked, trying to parse out the nonsensical name. That's what you're here for, White? Ruby asked with incredulity creeping into her interrogation. Oh no. I've never had it. Naruto responded, taking her curiosity in stride. What? Ruby nearly screamed, looking as if her world had been destroyed. Incredulity giving way to full-blown panic. This is an emergency. She said. We need to get you some, stat. Too perplexed at the colorful child his own age, Naruto had no recourse but to blink again. Don't worry. The girl declared. It'll be the second bestest thing you ever tasted. What's the first? Naruto asked with the first hint of investment as he was swept up in this strange girl's cute world. Cookies? Cookies? Have you never had those either? Somehow, she seemed even more devastated than the first time, and Naruto was made to wonder just how it was physically possible to hold such emotion. He got ready to respond but was stopped when he was pushed from behind. Distracted, he fell to the ground and dropped the paper money that was blown away by the wind a moment later. Are you okay? Ruby asked in concern, helping the boy up. The boy didn't respond as he watched the cash float away. That was all your money? Ruby asked. Naruto nodded, looking somewhat dejected he wouldn't be able to taste the treat after it had been so hyped up. But that was life sometimes, as the elders would tell him back home. You just moved forward. I'm sorry, Ruby said with as much moroseness as she knew how. Upon realizing it was her turn, she got ready to walk up to the counter but paused and gave Naruto a second look. She seemed to arrive at a decision about something known only to her childish mind and nodded. Without another word, she grabbed Naruto by the hand and pulled him to the stand with her. 2 ice creams please. Ruby ordered with a big smile. What flavors, kid? The man at the stand asked. Ruby looked over at Naruto. 2 vanillas. The girl with gradated hair preened. A moment later she was holding 2 white-capped cones and handed one to a somewhat surprised Naruto. Here you go. Why? Staggered, he let go of the blank look he had been giving her the entire time and adopted one of confusion. Because, you look sad, Ruby said. And I don't want you to be sad. Thank you, Naruto said earnestly, unsure of what else to say or do. He didn't understand what this was, both what she had done and what he was feeling. Ruby, come on. Ah, my uncle. The girl said, not noticing the change she had imparted. I gotta go now, hope you enjoy your ice cream. Naruto nodded, realizing with her uncle's voice that he had been gone much longer than he planned. Debating only for a second, he gave a small wave, then the two ran off in different directions. One towards the blue and red lights, the warm multicolor of friends and family. The other, back into the monochrome world, where everything eventually is consumed by darkness. Further down that road and still basking in the sun and elation, Ruby Rose watched as the headless Nevermore body fell into the foggy abyss with a certain surrealism. She honestly couldn't believe her plan worked. By all accounts it shouldn't have worked. How had it worked? Ah, who cared? It worked. Bonus, she and her partner were on better terms now than when they met. Oh, today was looking to be a great day. Nothing could throw her off. Save for the man that she saw come out of the forest with panic stricken across his face. She had not expected that at all. I need help, more than panicked, the man was terrified and didn't care who it was that heard his plea. What are you doing here? Ruby asked, the man's frantic energy rekindling her fight-or-flight response. How are you here? I don't know, the man stuttered with disbelief at his own ignorance. Everything's a blur. We can take you to Beacon, and the teachers will know what to do, Ruby reassured both the man and herself. The man smiled and Ruby was quick to mime it. A few minutes later the other freshmen had joined her and together they all made their way back to campus. The distance was far shorter than before their triumphs over the Grim. And together with that act, they carried on with ease, despite the man's disconcerting arrival. All the while, they probed the man with questions, and he answered them as best he could. This proved harder than the short hike back to campus, as he didn't seem reassured by their credentials and kept slowing them down by glancing over his shoulder. Well, I suppose first days could be weirder. Yang chuckled, unconcerned for the man's paranoid behavior, nor their prior inconveniences. While the others took solace in this easy statement, Purr and Blake suddenly became more aware of their surroundings. Perhaps there was substance to this man's caginess. Someone or something was out there. Watching them. Thank you for your help, young lady. Coincidentally, by this time, the man had become immured with his fear. Enough to properly thank the people going out of their way to help him. It's not a problem, she smiled in all confidence. Today had been a good day after all. It all went south so quickly. But to Ruby, everything had been in slow motion. Even then, she nor anyone else was able to react in time as the man's throat split opened. He reached for his neck haphazardly but to no avail, the floodgates already having opened never to be shut. What had been done could not be undone. What had been seen, never to be unseen. Ruby stood stock still while her eyes traced the wound to the blade to the hand and to the arm, and then the black masked face. It was vulpine and leering, already decorated with crimson streaks. But she didn't see this intricacy. Instead, looking them dead in the eye where blue met silver. One, a cloudy horizon brimming with tumultuous emotions. The other, an icy blue tundra devoid of anything. But for a flicker of recognition that met in the middle like lightning. Then it was gone, and Ruby blinked once as the cold, wet reality set in. 1 minute she was escorting a man to Beacon after her entrance exam, the next she was watching him bleed out in front of her. All because of the person she was staring at. Though they didn't stay long under her gaze. Before the scythe-wielding girl could so much as let out a word, they were moving. They bolted into the forest, fleeing the scene of the crime. It was only when he began moving did the others react. As they were before, Purr and Blake were the first to respond as they thoughtlessly chasing after the killer. While their determination was set on bringing the killer to justice, Yang ran over to Ruby as she was her main priority. Ruby, are you okay? The blonde girl demanded, looking over her sister who remained unresponsive. Speak to me, sis. He's dead, Ruby though. He's dead. Her eyes drifted in the direction that Blake and Purr had run off. Why? She was gone, leaving only a trail of petals as she sought an answer. Naruto leapt through the trees at a fast pace, or augmenting his already trained body to distance himself from the two who he knew were following him. He hadn't expected this outcome, but he wasn't surprised by it either. These were huntresses in training after all. And it was also his luck. He felt the hairs on his tail bristle and quickly moved as a javelin claimed a few, shivering at the close call. They were determined, he'd give them that. Wait. The faunus turned to see a blur past the two initial pursuers, leaving a trail of rose petals in their wake. A semblance. For all the training his master had put him through, Naruto wouldn't be caught that easily, however. But he wouldn't be able to keep the distance through the trees. Instead, he landed on the ground and focused. In burst of speed he was off again. The forest became a blur as he cut through the wind at an unnatural pace by normal standards, but not by whomever wielded that semblance. The thought was prophetic, as he would find out a moment later. The sound of a gunshot outran him, and he found himself overtaken by the red streak who skidded to a stop. Coalescing into a human and girl, they spun around while swinging out their weapon, forcing Naruto to jump into the air and dodge. Though his dogged pursuer seemed to have anticipated this, as they ended up rocketing through the air, once again farther away. Naruto looked up to see the Chaser a few yards away, her weapon trained on him, should he try to run once again. Figuring she was a distance fighter, he spun his ninjato around and held it in reverse grip, prepared for a close quarters battle. He wasn't however prepared for the question she would ask him. Why? In the pause of surprise, Ruby took the chance to analyze the killer that she had lapped in their game of cat and mouse. Crescent Rose stood at the ready should he move. She could process that it was a he now, and not just some nameless faceless killer wore a thin black hoodie with the right sleeve missing. Belts wrapped around the bare arm tightly like the lock strap to her diary. Through her scope, Ruby could make out the faintest hints of words ink, a tattoo under the leather bindings. Though what secrets these held, she didn't know. More obvious but no less guarding, lacquered plates covered his chest and back. This grew into hammered steel which was secured on the left shoulder and forearm. A bushy orange belt was the only thing to stand out from the drab colors as it wrapped around his waist, though Ruby would swear it actually wrapped itself around his waist. Beneath it was covered by black cargo pants, tucked into equally black combat boots that also looked alive, ready to jump into another fighter fast away. Though these details were mostly glossed over as the hooded girl's attention was consumed by the mask which was like a black hole. Black as night, that if not for the red markings scarring it, Ruby thought she would be sucked in never to escape. The silver-eyed girl gulped before finding her nerves once again. Why? Repeating the question as much to hear her own voice as the answer, Ruby looked hollowly at the masked assailant who held a blade at the ready. Her own finger was on the trigger, ready to pull it. He was the target, came the unconvincing response at long last. Do you realize what you've done? I killed him. It was out in the open now. The words seemed to only make it worse for the girl. No longer a one-sided reality. Don't you feel anything? Ruby asked, herself feeling indignation, fear, and also the slow squeezing of her trigger finger. Uncaring for this, the masked killer tilted his head slightly. You took another life. The assailant didn't speak. The silence seemed to only anger the girl even more. Without a further word, the masked mystery turned to run. But the girl wasn't having it. She flipped the muzzle of Crescent Rose around and fired, blasting herself at the murderer in an attempt to incapacitate him. However, even with his back turned he was ready and jumped out of the way of the red rocket that was Ruby before going in for an attack of his own. He poised his ninjato for a strike, but the girl with mixed hair was ready and she quickly used her scythe to blast her away from the slash. Quick to recover, Ruby flipped her weapon and shot off at him, once again on the attack. In the heat of combat, she swung the large weapon at her opponent without noticing or caring how much strength she had imbued. Similar strikes had bisected beasts several times larger than either of them, so imagine her surprise when he managed to stop the momentum of the swing with a block from his forearm. Not even her dad had managed such a feat. The fox masked boy charged at her and cocked his arm. A trench knife had slipped into his open hand while she was busy being stunned. This close, it was a clear danger, one that Ruby wasn't having any of. She fired another shot which propelled her scythe towards the boy, hitting him in the back with its not insignificant mass. Or at least, that's how it would have gone if he hadn't backflipped at the last second, twisting at an impossible angle to avoid getting reaped. Ruby skidded to a halt while her opponent landed in a crouching position on the balls of his feet. Watching her behind his mask, he placed his ninjato in its sheath and pulled out a second trench knife. Stance cocked and his fist held aloft as he got ready to attack once again. He wouldn't get the chance though. Forced to abort, he fell backwards into a defensive stance, with crossed his arms to block two swords coming at him from both sides. Blake and Purra had caught up. Through concerted effort he managed to push the two back and leapt into the air to distance himself from the newest threat to his life and more importantly, his mission. Oh no you don't. He barely lifted his unclothed arm to take the brunt of Yang's surprise attack but was still knocked into a tree by the sheer momentum. Shaking the otherwise debilitating blow off quickly, he looked up, anticipating what was coming next. As his luck would have it, he soon found himself surrounded from four sides by the huntresses, all prepared to take him down. But not out. The fools. You're surrounded, Purra declared with an air of authority that echoed through the woods. Give up peacefully, the killer would do no such thing if his reaching for the sword was anything to go by. You're alone here, buddy, Yang scoffed. There's no way you can take us all on. The masked man didn't give anything away, but the air around him shifted slightly, as if it disagreed with the blonde brawler's statement. A moment later, nature unfolded to prove her wrong. Whoever said he was alone. 3 shadowy blurs landed next to the masked attacker, his allies revealing themselves at last. All of them were cut from the same cloth, both in their garb and the way in which they held themselves. Bodies prepared to react, their blank white masks yet gave away none of their intentions. But if they were supporting their fellow assassin, their motives must have been as black as the fox, whose carved snarl now looked more like a smirk. Things were about to get a lot more complicated, it seemed. The mission has been completed, the black masked killer spoke in a low voice to his comrades. We have no more reason to be here, they all nodded in understanding. One of the newcomers threw something onto the ground, shrouding them in a thick smoke a moment later. Determined not to let this get in their way, the huntresses leapt forward into the haze to take down their designated enemies. However, it was too late. When the smoke cleared, the mysterious masked fighters were long gone, leaving 4 huntresses frustrated and livid. Their victorious examination doing nothing to drain the feeling of restiveness nor that of failure. Damn it, Yang growled, punching a fist into her hand. Blake sighed in frustration while Purr gripped her sword tighter. In contrast to these active reactions, Ruby had a faraway look in her eyes. The only thing on her mind being the question she had asked earlier. Why? Her question, however, would not be answered. Not today, at any rate. Osmond and Glinda along with a few other staff members were in the clearing when Ruby and the others had gotten back. All of their faces were grim and watchful, as if waiting for another attack. When Weiss's eyes landed on Ruby and the others, she turned towards Osmond and alerted the headmaster of their presence. Are you all okay? The gray-haired man inquired immediately, not trusting his surveillance system which had coincidentally gone out at the same time the masked murderer had shown up. Yeah, Yang responded, garnering nods from the others. Just upset we weren't able to get the bastard. Language, Ms. Xiaolong, Goodwitch reprimanded as she continued over the students. Perfunctory reprimand aside, she was no less concerned. Were any of you able to get a good look at the assailant? Look at him, the brawler spoke up again in partial disbelief. We fought him. We wouldn't have though, if not for Ruby, Purr added. She caught up to him before the rest of us and held him off until we arrived. Though we didn't expect him to have accomplices as well, Blake picked up. Were you able to get a good look at his face? No, Ruby sighed dejectedly. That is unfortunate, Glinda sighed. But I suppose, given everything, it's not a surprise that you can't remember what he looked like, even if you had seen him. No, we didn't just forget, Ruby corrected. We didn't see it because of the masks they were all wearing. The blonde professor frowned at the explanation. Masks. Yeah, Ruby continued. They were all wearing white masks, kinda like the White Fang, but with strange markings on them. Although, the one that did the deed, Ruby shuddered before pushing forward. His was black. The explanation had changed something in the air, almost like it had before the other intruders had shown up. Glinda looked over at Osmond with a stern gaze. The headmaster in question frowned at the description. What? Blake asked, having noticed the teacher's reaction. Ruby, these masks, Osmond spoke, looking at the youngest one there. Did they look anything like this? He opened up his scroll and showed the screen to Ruby. She looked at the drawn-up image to see masks that each depicted different animals, but the overall design was the same as the one in question. Yeah, Ruby nodded. Then one caught her eye. The one I fought had one that looked like that, she pointed to a mask on the screen. A fox, but black. Kitsune. Ruby blinked before realizing that the headmaster had spoken once again. Huh. It was a kitsune mask, Osmond sighed. This is not good. Osmond, they haven't been active in Vale for years, Glinda hissed, not liking the illusions her superior was drawing. Who hasn't? Weiss asked, feeling left out. The teachers regarded at the gathered students who were all looking at them with the same question. Professors, Purr began tentatively, who did we encounter out there? Osmond and Glinda shared a conferring glance one last time before Osmond nodded, causing Glinda to scowl. The headmaster appraised at his students once again. Interesting year indeed, he mused. You all encountered an old enemy of huntsmen and huntresses that I thought we abolished in Vale, Osmond explained. Ruby felt a chill run down her spine as she recalled the eyes of the boy as seen through the slits like gaps in time. You all encountered assassins. Chapter 2. Eyes. Alright, please settle down. The chatter died suddenly as the man stepped up on stage. He was glad for this because normally he'd have been able to rely on Glinda to announce his presence. But his professor was still a little miffed at this decision, to say the least. And it followed that this announcement was anything but normal. So, do you think this is about what happened yesterday? Hush, Ruby. We'll find out in a second if you'd just be quiet. The newest students, obviously, were less disciplined than the others. But Osmond could still see the older teens and young adults fidgeting uncomfortably on their feet all the same. And he could not blame them, for it was not lightly he assembled the student body together. I'll keep this brief. There were a few nervous chuckles as some recognized his default opening, but they would be the only ones for the remainder of his speech. Though it may not seem like it, what I will say is more of a public safety announcement than a history lesson. Within the crowd and confusion, Osmond heard a grunt of disappointment. He found Oobleck easily enough, his professor doctor towered over most students and was obviously disappointed that the headmaster wasn't going to be revealing any of the other sordid details here. This is because while many kingdoms have done their best to erase this story from the history books at one point, myself included, this has not stopped it from becoming relevant once again. As some of you know, he nodded towards the first years who made to cower into the darkness of the amphitheater. We had a little incident at initiation yesterday. I should be clear that it was nothing to do with the incoming class and that in fact, the prospective students involved comported themselves as best can be expected. Dim lights hid their collective chagrin, though they were happy to note that a few older students nodded, acknowledging them. However, I fear this might not be an isolated incident. And so it is only right to prepare you all, moving forward. Though he had promised to keep it brief, Osmond cleared his throat and settled into the proper composure for storytelling. Huntsmen have long since been seen as a symbol of hope for our society, the guiding light for remnant. It only follows that this bright light casts a long shadow. I will break my own rule here and digress into the past slightly. You all should know by now that huntsmen and huntresses have existed since before the kingdoms officially formed. To this day, no one knows precisely when the specialty or even the title came into our common vernacular, but it has not been for want of trying. Many of our best historians have tried to track down the first huntsman to little success. This is probably because the history of hunters is inexorably tied to the history of Grimm, which still remains so much a mystery. On the opposite hand, the other career which formed around the same time has a well-documented history that collectively the kingdoms have done their best to bury. Why, you surely must wonder. How could this be true when it has been omitted from all your lessons to date? A secret group as old as the institution of hunting, surely the old man must be going senile himself. There was no laugh at this suggestion, no one rose to the bait to poke fun at their headmaster. Sadly, I know this story for a fact because I was alive when they vanished. I now know that they simply hid and were not eliminated like we all believed. I see we were fools to ever believe they had been beaten to begin with. How could we destroy something that has been around for as long as humanity of faunus? How could we ever hope to conquer sin? How could we ever banish our own shadow? For as long as there will be humanity, there will be the assassins. You have all dedicated yourselves to fighting the menace known as Grimm. But by this point in your lives, you will realize that there are other monsters out there disguised as people. There are those who have made the same sort of vows to exterminate this scourge without any of the thanks or honor bestowed upon our warriors of the light. I am not asking you to appreciate these assassins as you do your fellow students. I will not expect you to get used to them, and I do not even desire you to accept that there are young men and women your age who are taught to take a life as one takes Grimm. However, you must know. You must be prepared to encounter these people and understand that they are every bit warriors whose skills and even pride are on par with your own. But more than that, they are people. Human beings and faunus like you and me. Until we know more about why they have returned and what they intend, you need to keep this fact foremost in your minds if you should find yourselves dealing with them. Exercise extreme caution outside the school walls from now on. And above all, patience. That is all. You are dismissed. So, you don't seem all that surprised. There had been a somber silence as the students had funneled out of the auditorium, back to their own business which included classes and settling into their rooms for the newly inducted. But as the newly formed team rwby rounded the corner to their hallway, the blonde bruiser couldn't hold her tongue any longer. Her target was her dark-haired partner who had gone back to reading her book the moment they weren't elbow to elbow with a tide of students. Why should I be? Blake shrugged, flipping a page. I'm perfectly willing to believe there's a group of humans out there who kill others for money. The real world's not as pretty as Beacon's campus paints it. Frankly, I'm more surprised at you, Yang. I didn't think you were as innocent as Ruby. Hey. Hearing her name, the red-cloaked girl hadn't caught what was said but knew enough that she was being compared unfavorably to her sister. That's Captain Ruby, by the way. Right, like you'd ever let us forget. Her reluctant partner and even more unwilling subordinate griped. How a naive little girl like you even got in this school is still far more shocking to me than those ruffians will ever be. Hey, lay off my sis, Yang barked at the heiress. And where do you get off calling someone naive? You weren't even there. HMPH. It's not like I haven't seen them before. It was a good thing Weiss was in the middle of the group when they all stopped, or else she would have walked right on by without noticing their shocked silence. Even Blake had the decency to drop the spine of her book enough to look over it. What? You just said you've seen them before, Yang quoted, pointing an accusing finger at her sister's partner. These assassin guys. You're sure? Of course I'm sure, Weiss huffed, turning her back on her team but also a part of her past sh''d, rather leave there. How could I ever forget? Should have figured a Schnee would have dealings with those kinds of people. Blake dismissed while simultaneously glaring holes in her book. I would never. Shocking them for the second time in as many minutes, Weiss's assertion was said with such vehemence that she surprised herself. She blinked and looked away at the floor in mortification. Weiss turned back to her team to see them leering intently at her. I can't," as an afterthought she added, "not here." Okay, first off, back in the security of their dorm and away from the prying eyes and ears, Weiss had lost much of her hesitation and ramped up to full lecture mode. If she was going to work with her team, they best know exactly what this latest development portended. "Yes, I've known about and even seen the assassins before. They're still around in Atlas and have been for some time. But no, I have never, will never, and don't want to be associated with anyone who fraternizes with their lot." "Then what about your dearest father?" Blake snipped disbelievingly. Killers for hire sounds like something right up Jacques Schnee's alley. Though she'd like to deny the slight against her family, Weiss could not utter a word against it and simply settled for grinding her teeth in anger. "You're not wrong," she admitted, at last getting her animosity under control. "Which is why it's a good thing no one from our family is allowed to associate with them." Anticipating any of Blake's follow-on snipes, Weiss explained further. "It was the first thing General Ironwood did when he came to power, shortly after my grandfather died and he took over the company. He barred any Schnee living or future from contracting their group. I don't know much about how the deal pertains to them, only that it was conditional for the assassins to reform legitimately under the new government. I know they also have a litany of protocols and paperwork that someone has to go through before they can be hired." "Paperwork?" Cross-legged in front of her bed, Ruby looked as appalled by this revelation as legalized murder. "Yes, paperwork," Weiss rolled her eyes, "else Atlas would have crushed them long ago. Of course, I still say they have no business tolerating such blackguards. So why do they?" Appearing bored with the proceedings, Yang was in fact as appalled by the whole deal as anyone else. "Profit," Blake surmised, "power. Control. The usual reasons." "Despicable." Yang chimed in. Her sister was oddly quiet on the whole matter apart from her earlier outburst. "Yes, they are." Weiss agreed, shocking the lot even though they knew her stance on the matter. "Though the SDC is prohibited from their contracts, other corporations are not. Which is why when I take over my grandfather's company, I am going to see that they are barred from all industry agreements. Osmond claims that we can't kill them, but just maybe we can starve them out." Admirable, still unconvinced, Blake was the only one not looking at the Schnee with any kind of approval. "But that still doesn't explain how you crossed paths if you're really supposed to be so disassociated." The two girls held a staring match for an uncomfortably long time while the sisters looked on in helpless confusion. Finally, Weiss relented. With a sigh, she realized that she might as well. In for a penny. 2 pennies on the eyes of the dead man who stared up at the ceiling with empty eye sockets. She shuddered. "It was about 10 years ago. My father had taken me along to his public celebration when he became CEO to show me off. 'Daughter, come here.' She had been having a one-sided conversation with a nosy duchess who preened every time Weiss said something halfway intelligent and smelled too much like potpourri. The young girl was only too glad to get away, but with anyone other than her stern-faced father, who all but dragged her through the throngs of overly dressed people. Their garish trappings made the man's plebeian getup all the more conspicuous, even though Weiss thought he would fit into any dull office space in Atlas. Although, there wasn't even a glass of champagne in the man's hand to show that he was trying to fit in. He just stared at the awkward father-daughter pair as they approached with a bored expression on his unassuming face. Exchanging no names but only a tight nod with the man, Jacques kneeled to Weiss's level and in a rare moment of solemnity and consideration he told her. "Weiss, I'd like you to meet someone." She looked over his shoulder at the man she was supposed to become acquainted with by face alone, apparently. His head was canted in a question, but his bespectacled eyes bore straight through her father as if he weren't even there and straight into Weiss's fragile little heart. "If someday I end up dead, this will be the man who kills me." The roles were reversed, now it was everyone else who regarded Weiss with disbelief, while the dark-haired girl held something akin to understanding before she turned and hid it. There were a couple more times after that. Corporate functions, a couple of threats, happenstance though it was like she was reciting a grocery list, it was clear that each time was incised in her memory. Quite honestly, they scare me. Every time I'm anywhere near them I just want to get away as fast as possible. They're all horrible, but I'll never forget that first time. Waiting patiently with solemnity, at the end of Weiss's confession, Yang cracked a smile. It's perfectly alright Weiss. No one ever forgets their first time. Why, you filthy. Cackling, and with her experience as a huntress in training, Yang darted away from the warpath she had incited. It was safe to say the Weiss was livid, not even thinking about using her semblance to catch the blonde as she bounded around the room. It was also safe to say that she, along with everyone else, was momentarily distracted from the subject that still weighed heavily on their minds. Even if they knew it wouldn't go away, it was nice to be able to forget who they were, what they were training to be, and the world that awaited them outside their dorm. It had been a hard first day. And they hadn't even had classes yet. "You think this is still school, boy?" With his head scraping the tatami mat, said boy didn't respond. Even if he were to stand, the panel of shadowy figures in front of him wouldn't see his face behind the mask. Not that they could tell what he was thinking, anyway. Ever since Yami had gotten his claws into him, the boy had been an unaccountable variable. You're not receiving a grade. Life is pass-fail. And you screwed up. His three prostrate teammates could say nothing in his defense. They had to endure this humiliation in silence until. Enough. The final word on all matters within and without their shady organization. The one they called Cage, who entertained the presence of his advisors if only to give the air of benevolence. The one he called Gramps when he was younger, too young to remember. That he did so now was at the behest of the man, which he didn't understand either. But it wasn't his place to question. Kitsune completed his mission without casualties and collateral damage. You don't consider this collateral damage, Saratobi. Of all people, he had to cross Ozpin's territory. Ozpin. The great and terrible. We've only now recovered since the last time he. Are you considering that I need a history lesson, Jin? He didn't need to look up to see the blood drain from Jin's face. Kitsune could feel it as if he were taking the insufferable man's life with his own two hands. Cage simply asserted that kind of presence. No, of course you are not. The pungent smell of tobacco wafted over Kitsune's head as the old man exhaled a long cloying ribbon of smoke. Granted, the timing is not ideal. I had hoped a few more contracts might have been fulfilled before my old friend caught wind. You are correct, Jin, that scrutiny from on high is not something we can afford right now, while our position is so tenuous. But we have no choice but to push forward with operations if we are to succeed. At this point, all we can hope is that Ozpin's caution for his students curtails his curiosity. However, the clack of the pipe as it was emptied into a wooden ashtray made them all jump, or rather, it would have if every single one of them weren't trained to hold perfectly still under the most trying of circumstances. I am quite interested to know how this mission was approved in the first place. It seems to me that someone in logistics must have gotten their wires crossed, as the target seemed to know we were coming. Enough, at least, to flee into the Emerald Forest to seek Beacon's Cloud. His voice was calm, indistinguishable from that grandfatherly consideration. But the four with their head on the chopping block knew better. That if it were directed at them, the latent pressure could have knocked them out cold. I also cannot fathom it to be a coincidence that this occurred on the same day as their entrance exam. The one that they host every single year. Scratch that, they would have died right then and there. An unfortunately accident, I'm sure, but it wasn't. And as skilled as he was with a sword, lying was one assassin's skill he yet lacked. I'll look into it. Jin replied in monotone, revealing nothing. Kage-sama. Clearly, with equal deadpan, the shadow leader accepted his lieutenant's flippancy. For now. In the meantime, it is perhaps better if Kitsune were to keep a lower profile. Until we can ascertain what kind of fallout this incident will bring, he will be temporarily demoted and reassigned under his old caretaker, along with the rest of his team. This way, we will not weaken ourselves in the field but have plausible deniability if there should be a reckoning. With all due respect, Kage-sama, with this new voice, it was entirely possible they meant it. But there was also something else, reserved for him especially. His teammate had called it contempt. Yes, and that was supposed to be a bad thing to feel about another person. But the only one whose opinion mattered in the end was that of Gigi. Is this not being too lenient? I fear that man coddles the boy too much in his training. This probably was what allowed for the mistake in the first place. Behind Kitsune there was an almost imperceptible growl that reverberated through the straw mats. His teammates didn't appreciate the derision of their handler, but none were to lift a finger. So, which of our other more experienced assets would you suggest? Kitsune remembered his teacher wondering aloud why the powerful Cage tolerated this so-called counsel. He wanted to ask the same thing, but knew to do so would be just as disrespectful. If I may, perhaps Itachi. He could hear the crooning in her voice, like she had already won a victory. Someone like him would instill discipline into Kitsune. And with his prodigal skills, one can hardly say that the student would receive subpar rehabilitation. There was a minor release of tension from his teammates as Weasel was well liked amongst them, enough to score position of second favorite sensei in a unanimous vote. Technically, it was 3-4 and 1 abstain, since he never participated in the activity. Namakuji typically claimed his votes, giving them 2. In fact, he wondered if the woman had been informed of their unique relationship to the man and knew that his most vocal of teammates would be cackling in joyous irony later. Very well, Saratobi conceded after a pause to make it seem like he was thinking. Itachi has recently returned from his own mission and should be capable of starting his new task tomorrow. Until then, I believe we are done here. Dismissed. The 4 assassins disappeared without so much as a good job for their efforts. But Kitsune would expect one later, in private. For some reason, Gigi always insisted on it. And he couldn't bring himself to mind. Personally, I don't think the boy sensei is the only one being too lenient on him, Jin huffed, folding his arms at where the 4 teenagers just resided. I understand his status, Saratobi, but you treat him like a grandson. He has the potential, but only if it's used correctly. He is a blade. An inhuman weapon. The conditioning Yami put him through was the reason why I went through such efforts to remove him from his care. The cage interrupted. Not soon enough, apparently. At the moment, he is a liability. If it were up to me, he wouldn't set foot outside until he fully understood his responsibilities. Duties which would only be hindered by this fostering of mercy. More of the fruity tobacco burned while the small council waited in silence. There were none too few that agreed with Jin, but far fewer that would dare say what he had just said. And if I were you, Jin, I would leave the boy's lessons to his teachers, calm and with his eyes closed until then. The old cage suddenly came alive and looked at his lieutenant with brown eyes that had the strength to move mountains and patience to rearrange the world to his liking. And the next time you deign to lecture me about my decisions, I would be more than happy to introduce you to my teachers, understood? The portraits of all the former cages seemed to glare out at Jin in support of their living representative, and the venerable assassin very nearly joined them in the afterlife right then and there. Why yes sir, of course. That's it. I need a drink. The pink-haired woman declared as she stormed down the hallway, quitting the stealth and silence that they'd been forced to maintain inside the council's chambers. She was on a beeline to the communal mess hall ASAP, regardless of her teammates trailing behind or any innocent bystander that happened to get in her way. Sakura, we've been over this, her childhood friend massaged his temples, headache not solely from having worn his mask for over 24 hours. You can't drink. Watch me. Taking it as a dare, Sakura elbowed her way into the line and snagged a cold once from the bottom of an ice chest. But before she could sally up to the register or even pop the cap, the sweaty glass bottle was plucked from her grip. Hey. I believe what Sasuke was trying to say is that while you can physically drink, it would be against the rules for on-duty personnel. Smiling blithely, the pale-faced teen passed the illicit beverage down the line to Sasuke without turning away from the fuming Sakura, or really, without even so much as blinking. It was always kind of creepy how his face really was no different than the Muse mask he wore. I'm sure Naruto would not appreciate you getting us into more trouble than we already are. Behind the socially inept boy, Sasuke hissed and in front Sakura bit her lip as both reeled at what had been thoughtlessly said. Oh dear, I think I said something wrong again, haven't I? They all glanced back to see their captain with an empty tray in his hands, an equally blank look on his face. If anything, he was staring at the beer and contemplating the age-old dilemma of old enough to kill versus professional discipline. Collectively they breathed a sigh of relief, but at the tail end it became one of exasperation. Even at his very public lambasting, the blonde killer divulged nothing of his inner thoughts. Leading them to wonder at times if he even had them. Nah captain. Naruto looked up from his tray, perceiving the slip-up as much as he had the gruel which made its way onto his plate. What is it, Namikuji? Sakura flinched at the name, having disassociated it with herself and leaving it behind with her slug mask. Are you alright? Yes, there was hesitation only after this as Naruto paused and noticed the thin Kongi with Nabashi in front of him for the first time. Perhaps I need something to eat. That hardly looks like enough, Sasuke remarked, drowning his pasta with tomato sauce. Indeed. If I may, Taicho, we did not have proper sustenance for the last 24 hours, Sai related clinically, you need to recover the energy expenditure. Might I recommend something more calorie intensive? Today seems to be Mistralian themed. They have pork cutlets and ramen. Well, if I can't have booze, Mom is gonna go for some ice cream. No. Everyone once again froze, colder than the door to the freezer which was cracked open. And by now, the others behind them in line were becoming irritated with their continued delay. But like in the council chambers, there were plenty of opinions and not many voices. I'm fine. Naruto eventually relaxed enough to bite out. Though his metal tray would have to be retired from service. You may do what you like. Which didn't mean that they had to follow their humorless captain once they all served themselves and balanced out at the register. But they did anyway and followed him to a table because they were still a team. He was their captain, sure, and that meant that they should support him. But he was also just like them, a 16-year-old trained assassin, but one who did a harsher past than even what was considered the norm for their exclusive lot. In other words, he was their friend. I'm sorry. After several minutes of near silence, the three nearly choked at this sudden declaration from their leader. Normally the only noise he made during eating was the quiet sound of mastication or the occasional barking of an order at Sakura, who tried to incite some kind of emotional response. That's alright, some people just don't like ice cream. Are you lactose intolerant? They never mentioned it on your medical records. I believe, Sakura, that our captain was referring to the mission. I know, sigh. Then why did you talk about ice cream? The medic glared over her strawberry sundae at the boy who resembled a blank slate in very nearly every way. Why do you feel the need to apologize? Breaking from his own silent reverence of his meal, Sasuke got them back on track. You completed the mission. There was nothing else you could have done. I could have killed her. No one needed a clarification as to whom their commander meant. It had all been there in meticulous detail in his report, which was used as evidence against him. What they could really use subtitles for was the pensive way he stared at the bottom of his bowl, looking at the dried anchovies, as if they might once again swell and swim away into the thin white broth. The assassins didn't kill bystanders. No matter how much it inconvenienced them in a mission such as this, no matter how thankless the effort turned out to be, it was something that had to be done for their own peace of mind and for the integrity of their organization. It was what separated them from common crooks, bandits, grim. I should have killed her. He whispered this sacrilege to himself as he scooped up one of the tiny silver fish with his spoon and contemplated its hollowed-out eyes. Naruto would never forget those eyes. Dull as a tarnished silver coin which was traded for his humanity, anger, defiance, grief and all those things he would never understand. So why? Didn't he kill me? Huh? Re-entering the room in time to catch the snippet, Weiss wasn't sure what to make of it. Nor was she really sure what to make of the expression on the red-themed girl who was staring out the window with a focus normally reserved for combat or schoolwork. You need to be asleep, Weiss scolded. Seriously, where were the other two when she needed them? This child. I was right there when it happened. Weiss paused at the younger girl's statement, trying to link it to some logic. What had they last talked about? I saw the blade cut his throat, Ruby continued as if Weiss weren't even there. I saw his panic before he bled out. In the background Weiss felt her breath hitch. She hadn't known that when forming her prior opinions. And when I caught up to him, I asked him why. Did they say anything? Weiss whispered, finding herself ensnared by the promise of reason at long last. A dissection of these monsters who to her were even more inhuman than Faunus. He just said he was the target, Ruby answered. And when I asked him if he realized what he had done, the newly minted captain felt her own words get caught in her throat. What? Weiss asked, suddenly impatient. What did he say? He said he had killed him, Ruby answered, knowing that she had to press on. And I think I would have taken it better if there was some regret or anger or even cruelty to it, but Ruby could feel her resolve wavering again. This burden was so heavy that she might collapse underneath its weight. What? Ruby, what is it? He felt nothing, Ruby hissed, hands ready to tear at her red-tipped locks. No sadness, no shame for taking another life, no twisted happiness for completing his mission, nothing. The younger girl cried as suddenly everything was shaken free. He should have felt something. Abashedly glancing downwards, Weiss suddenly lost her enthusiasm for the knowledge as the girl in front of her poured it all out. She had been consumed by the mystery of these assassins for so long that she never dared to think that they were as plain as that man had been nearly a decade ago. Again, where were the other two? She had no idea how to comfort the distraught girl. She had no idea how to console herself. I don't even think he knew the man's name, she said hollowly, at last purged of almost everything. Neither of them would ever forget yesterday. She would never forget the man she had tried to help who died in front of her. She would never forget the answer his murderer had given her as to why he had killed him. He would never forget the girl who had pursued him to answer for his crimes. He would never forget the defiance she showed at his answer to her questions. But above all, neither would never forget those eyes. Those eyes that were as silver as the illuminating moon. He would never forget how they held so much. Those eyes that were as blue as the infinite sky. She would never forget how empty they were. Chapter 3. Obscurity. Ruby sat idly in her history class, though her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Primarily, she was focusing on figuring out how much coffee Professor Oobleck drank daily. Because, she was figuring there was no way he could move how he did without a semblance, which was her shtick, darn it. Or being hopped up on a heap ton of coffee. He's totally hopped up on coffee, her sister muttered as her head swiveled, tracking Oobleck in his quantum leaps around the room. How much do you think he drinks? Normally quiet and considerate, Blake weighed in her own inquiry as she too found herself staggered by the man's energy. Too much, Weiss huffed out quietly as she and the class moved their heads in sync to Oobleck's new spot. He should learn to control himself, nodding to herself sagely, Ruby pulled a cookie out of a bag and took a nibble out of it. She munched softly before looking at her partner. What? The heiress gave her withering glare. Want one? Ruby asked, holding the bag out. The glare turned into a growl. Now class, are there any questions before we continue? Pausing to let the class catch their breath, if not himself, Oobleck asked the goggle-eyed group, gaining the girl's attention. How the hell was he standing on the ceiling? Actually, Professor, a student spoke up, could you tell us more about assassins? What's the big deal behind them? That one nameless student spoke for all of them, and there was a chorus of agreement from others. Their curiosity had been piqued from the speech Ozpin had given the day before, and the discussion had been a long time coming. Festering, Oobleck considered, for even longer than that. Belying his normal freneticism, the teacher coolly surveyed the class from his perch on the ceiling before sighing. A moment later, he zipped off the wall and in front of his desk. "Very well," Oobleck agreed, daring to defy gravity but not curiosity, "I will tell you what I know about them." There seemed to be a buzz of excitement in the air as students anticipated a story that wouldn't put them to sleep. Team rwby were not among the eager, having experienced the current reality. But their interest was just as high. Thanks to Weiss, they now understood the relationship of how they worked in Atlas. But not about how it had come to be this way, and leading to the most important question of all. Why? Around the time the kingdoms were coming into existence, Oobleck began, contemplative behind the constant reflection in his glasses, man was still coming to terms with their knowledge on the newly discovered dust. With its application, they now had an efficient way to combat Grim, the glasses-wearing teach explained. This presented an opportunity for the people to build up walls which held the first cities. This allowed them precious protection, and more importantly, time. Time? John asked. Yes, time, Mr. Ark. But please raise your hand next time, Oobleck answered. Time to further develop uses for dust and create weapons to combat the Grim. Suddenly the man's voice seemed to become darker. But not everyone was fine with living inside the walls. The Furnace, Blake muttered. Correct, Ms. Belladonna. Oobleck noted. But please raise your hand, the brunette nodded in understanding. They were forced in cages by humans who didn't understand what they were, and in some cases, people were scared. Well, I mean if you were locked in cages, who wouldn't be scared? Yang mumbled. I wasn't talking about the Furnace, Ms. Xiaolong, the coffee-addled man scolded. Please raise your hand, his eyes landed on Purra who had her hand raised. Yes, Ms. Nikos. People were scared of the Furnace, Purra noted academically, trying not to show her own disapproval. Correct. The man responded. People were afraid of what they didn't know. But not everyone had this viewpoint. Some believed the Furnace were just like them and deserved to be free, either choosing to live within the walls or without, but on their own terms. This led to arguments between the two sides. The man paused for a second as if debating something. He finally spoke again, but there was something different in his voice. And it was during that time that it happened. What? Ruby asked, suddenly on the edge of her seat and invested solely on the lecture. Oobleck looked up at her. His eyes unreadable, being obscured by his lenses. Why, the first murder within the walls, Ms. Rose. Clarity. Naruto, along with his team, stood in front of a man with their heads bowed. Face nor tone betrayed their degradation. But intimately familiar with the four, the man needed neither of these cues to interpret their humility. We're sorry to disappoint you, Sakura mumbled, almost afraid to speak. We should have been more efficient, Sasuke added to disguise their real failings. The man didn't look up from his book as they kept their heads down, but they could still feel his neutral gaze hidden behind his own unique mask. Did you neutralize the target? The man asked casually, flipping a page. Yes, Naruto responded. Then, it's all good, isn't it? The masked man responded nonchalantly. Besides, from what you said, the only reason you all revealed yourselves was because Naruto was cornered. That is correct, sensei, Naruto nodded, bowing even further into the ground, as if contemplating bashing his head against the floor, if such an act would not be considered a display of emotion. Then you did the right thing, the man smiled blithely behind his mask. Yes, but Kakashi-sensei, Sakura pressed. You seem particularly riled up about this, Kakashi interrupted, did the council say something about little old me? The tensing of her bowed shoulders was as easy to read as his book. Don't listen to those cronies, Kakashi dismissed with a nonchalant wave, remember what I taught you all when we became a team. Those who break the rules are trash, he began, prompting them to complete his own idiom, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash, the four teens uttered in tandem, monotonously as if reciting a trite pledge. Yet, this was one lesson they regarded like a prayer. Exactly, behind mask and book, Kakashi smirked. But what if we are forced to abandon them? Yet, not all the team knew how to interpret such matters of the heart. Naruto asked this question that had been on his mind for some time, unnoticing of his team's unconscious reactions. Behind him Sakura flinched as if struck, while Sasuke merely twitched and side-blinked, wondering if he should feel wary. What if the situation calls for it? He further probed. But having seen this coming for some time, Kakashi didn't seem surprised by the line of questioning from the blonde. Instead, he opted to lift his hand and lightly chop the boy on the head. Baka, Kakashi scolded with none of the bite the counselors had reserved for him. Sensei? Naruto asked, not particularly bothered by the chop which was more in jest than an actual attack like he was used to. Unable to help it, Sakura stifled a chuckle at the display, but also knew that the tension had broken. Still got a long way to go, Kakashi added with a humorous shake of his head. I do too, the teacher thought sadly to himself, looking at his blonde student and measuring his own failures against the socially stunted boy. Now then, Kakashi started, changing tracks, I hear Itachi will be overseeing you for a while. Hi, Sai responded for the rest of his team who were each occupied with their own thoughts. DCH, Sasuke grumbled, unnecessarily proclaiming his opinion on the matter. Oh, looks like someone's excited, the one-eyed man teased, elbowing the onyx-eyed boy. As if, Sasuke growled, part of the act that they all now knew how to play, even their captain. Ma, you say that, but you're acting a lot like the time I caught you, whoa. Kakashi stepped back as Sasuke leapt up from his prostration and attempted to hit the man. Shut up, he growled, no longer caring for propriety. Oh, did I almost reveal a secret? Duty done and game begun, Kakashi giggled before running off. I hate him, Sasuke scowled. You sound awfully defensive, Sai spoke. Did he catch you masturbating, by chance? Sai. Sakura scolded the boy's chosen language. But her eyes then turned to Sasuke with a teasing grin. But did he? No. Sasuke denied, glaring angrily at his two teammates. Oh, Sasuke, don't be shy, Sakura giggled, not noticing or choosing to ignore the visible signs of irritation forming on her teammate's head. Yes, you shouldn't be shy, Sasuke, Sai agreed. I have heard Sakura commit the same act when I go to ask her questions. Sai. Shoe now on the other foot, soon to be in Sai's ass, Sakura screeched, her face a shade of red that illuminated the darkroom. What did I say? Not understanding his own blunder, Sai asked with all honesty as he wondered whether to grovel or flee. Oh, is that so? Not normally one to participate in such games, Sasuke found he could not resist and probed his teammate with an eyebrow raised in mischievousness. Yes, Sai continued. And many times, it seems she is fantasieuse. Whatever further mortification he was about to blithely unveil was cut off from the powerful blow sent to his stomach. Though no longer distraught, Naruto merely watched the antics of his teammates with a tilted head. If any of this affected him, he wasn't showing it. Less than an outsider than the blonde, Kakashi looming in the hall, then turned away from the scene. He chuckled before coming to a somber bearing when thinking about Naruto. You're late, Baka-sensei. A long way to go, indeed, Kakashi thought, remembering a different time. Clarity. Murder, a student asked weakly. But he was brave in comparison, for the rest of the classroom fell as silent as that act so long ago. Yes, Oobleck responded with this one-word answer, giving away nothing behind the academic mask. But it was enough to get Ruby's mind working, implications starting to draw themselves into an even more dismal picture than before. While she fought against it, she could see and feel the same struggle happening in the minds of her neighbors. Prior to this, the only thing humans feared were the grim, the bespectacled teacher explained. After all, they were the monsters that had prowled upon them for generations. Strange as it sounds to us now, the thought of killing another human had never even occurred until that moment, or, more likely, the inclination was buried beneath the social milieu. The man paused for a second. However, once the cat was out of the bag, so to speak. He needn't elaborate. They could put together the picture. Though perhaps it would have been better if he had, erstwhile their avid imaginations continued to draw worse and worse images. The aftershock led to a great deal of paranoia within the city. He pressed on through the somber atmosphere, stoutly determined to remain objective. As it is today, the Faunus were the first to be blamed. But they were effectively proven innocent when another murder occurred the next night while the Faunus were being watched within their ward. Please, why, scoffed with a quiet derisiveness. Blake glared at the girl for a moment but opted to not make a comment lest she interrupt the flow. But with no known suspects, the town soon fell into chaos. Accusation flew, paranoia mounted, and trust was soon dismantled. And we all know what is attracted when negative thoughts grow too strong. Brim happened. After enough had fallen to this man-made plague, it became clear the targets were anything but random, Oobleck lectured. Bren raised his hand. What do you mean, Professor? Doctor, please. But thank you for raising your hand. Oobleck nodded to the polite young man. It was clear that all those being killed were those who supported releasing the Faunus from their ghettos. Figures, Blake scowled mentally. Such a blatant polarization gave rise to a new threat, the likes of which had never been previously recorded. Civil war. But thankfully, from that brink arose new grounds for remnant. From within that darkness, a light was born, Oobleck added with a dramatic flair, his normal gusto returning to color his cheeks. One person stood up and said that instead of focusing on trying to silence one another, the focus should be on trying to defeat the grim that were poised to overrun them. The first huntsman. To this day we do not know their name, the coffee addict grunted, clearly dismayed by this. Some suggest he might even be a myth. But their words rallied all the people behind that cause, and soon enough, a small group joined them. Along with the newly developed weapons, they managed to push the impending horde back. There was a buzz among the students at the realization that they had heard the birth of the first huntsman, latching on to some of the latent caffeinated energy and whispering excitedly to one another. But one who was normally the epitome of such freneticism was oddly subdued. Because Ruby saw it differently. Neither was Blake fooled, she knew a bait and switch when she saw one. The man had deliberately turned the course of the story. What had started out as the history of the assassins had turned into essentially propaganda, while quietly sweeping the contention under the rug, just like it had been done so long ago. Had the story even been real? And for that matter, was any of this real, or had they simply been led here all along? That's all for today, class. Clapping to get their attention, Oobleck announced the end moments before the bell rang. Next week I want a paper on the first cities and their inherent value which lead to creation of the kingdoms. I expect independent research. A final nail in the coffin to make them forget about the whole ordeal. There was a groan within the class as they all got up to leave. Ruby was about to exit along with the rest of her team but paused at the door and turned to face the sparsely populated classroom. "Professor," Ruby probed. "It's Doctor, but yes, what is it, Ms. Rose?" the man asked, looking askance at his youngest student. Was that story true? While her voice was meek, she had dared to ask the question. Like Blake, she had noticed the abrupt shift of the story but had said nothing as class had ended. "Indeed, it is," Oobleck's confident nod quickly turned into a dither, his educator's conscience not allowing him so blatant an omission. To an extent. This addendum gave Ruby pause. "What do you mean?" "Like I said before, historians aren't even certain the huntsman or huntress existed, though I am adamant that they did. And within their story, there are many different versions about the birth of assassins," he explained, trying to condense a lifetime of research into a few words. "Some say they rose in opposition of the huntsman. Others say they were a group of rogues that couldn't deal with peace. But no one knows for sure." Ruby asked. "No," Oobleck nodded, "however there is one fact that remains constant throughout all the different variants." "What's that?" Seeing the chance for a kernel of truth like the pinprick of light at the end of the tunnel, Ruby leaned forward across the prof doctor's desk until she was practically crawling on top of it. Taking little note of this behavior, Oobleck remained stoic as he answered. "They were born at the same time as huntsmen." Clarity. At home among the ancient walls, Saratobi Hiruzen walked through the compound in a somewhat somber mood. All was silent except for the gentle creak of the floorboards under his socked feet. Occasionally, an acolyte would appear and bow to him as he passed before disappearing back to their activities. While they would come and go, his thoughts remained markedly steadfast, lingering on the meeting earlier. "I don't know how they made this look so easy," the man sighed, thinking back on his predecessors whose portraits haunted the council chamber and whose ghosts haunted his mind. "You'd think after over 30 years I'd have the hang of it," he chuckled, right as another faceless member bowed to him before disappearing. "Better keep musing to my thoughts." Chagrined by this lip, Hiruzen followed his advice straight away and kept this to himself. "Don't need them thinking I'm senile." The man continued his walk in relative silence before catching a commotion not far up ahead. Curiosity not shriveled in his old age, he followed the noise to its source. Upon opening the familiar door, he arrived upon an interesting sight within. Before him, Sakura Haruno was holding her teammate Sai, who was slowly turning blue within her chokehold. Beside them and seemingly unnoticed, Sasuke Uchiha was slowly pulling out his katana. Both aggressors' eyes held a demonic glaze, while Sai continued clawing at the empty air. "I should have known." While this all transpired, Naruto watched the interaction at a safe distance with a dull expression. When Hiruzen found the boy's eyes, his mild amusement was overcome with sadness and silent regret. "It shouldn't be like this." Ahem, Hiruzen cleared his throat, gaining the attention of the entire room. A moment later, all 4 occupants of the room were silent in front of him with bowed heads. Well, all except for Sai, who was shaking on the floor while his lungs desperately drunk in the oxygen they had been deprived of. "Page-sama," Naruto greeted. If he had missed the man's presence and was embarrassed by it, it didn't show. "Oh no, no need for such formalities," the man assured them. "Please, continue your previous endeavors." Amusement danced within his old eyes as he watched their reactions unfold. Sakura turned red while Sasuke looked at anyone but him. Sai, hearing the proclamation, had maneuvered to where Naruto was between him and the other two. He wasn't keen on dying just yet. "How are you?" Cutting to the quick, he asked at the team whom had only recently come back from their mission. "We are fine, Kage-sama," Sakura answered for them. "Are you sure?" the man asked, still serious. "I wouldn't blame you if you were upset after earlier." Then Sakura stopped herself before sighing. There was no use lying to someone like their Kage. "We are better, Kage-sama, after talking with Kakashi-sensei." "Ah," the man nodded. "I'm guessing you didn't appreciate the comment about your sensei." The silence received was all the answer he needed. "Well, try not to worry about it too much." He dismissed it just as easily as he did their bow. They can say all they want, but they know the truth, he answered cryptically. The truth being that barring Itachi and himself, Kakashi was undoubtedly the strongest one in the compound. Though it is a little funny, Hiruzen began, regaining a bit of the prior mischievousness. What is Kage-sama? Sai asked, perplexed by their leader's strange behavior. It's funny that they thought Itachi would bring discipline to your team, the old man began. When we all know the truth. All of a sudden they were at ease, and the smiles that came across the young teens warmed his heart. Though it would have been warmer if all four had smiled instead of three. Well, I'll leave you to your own devices, leaving this thought for now, he nodded to himself in confirmation, I believe you were in the middle of killing Sai. Despite being their leader, Sai looked at the man with betrayal before his gaze shifted over to Sasuke and Sakura, who were giving him a look which clearly said they hadn't forgotten his earlier comments. Sakura's smile was terrifying. Captain, I request protection, raising his hand, Sai petitioned the blonde as the other two jumped at him. Another chuckle made its way from Hiruzen's mouth, but it quickly petered out when he noticed that Naruto had done nothing with the plea and simply remained fixed. Perhaps one eye was locked on him while he was still in the room, but those eyes yet held nothing. The memory came to the old man in that moment, pushing its way past the idle thoughts of an old man and the machinations of a ruler. It was the memory of a young blonde boy getting into a fight with a black-haired child his same age. In the background, a pink-haired girl was berating them both as the two tussled. A scene so full of life. If only I had arrived sooner. Another memory came to mind. This one bringing out his rage. This time it was of another blonde boy, it might have even been the same one if his mind was not playing tricks. He sat propped up against a wall, holding his knees to his chest with one hand and a weapon in the other. There was blood covering the walls and cracks in the blade. His corpse was still breathing, but his eyes were dead. If only. Another thought best kept to himself. Clarity. Dinner time at the cafeteria was bustling as students mingled sociably amongst each other, regaling friends and neighbors with their first official day in Beacon. Amongst them, Ruby watched the team interactions between some other freshmen who seemed to be laughing with each other and enjoying one another's company. John's team sat but one table away from them. She watched as the blonde threw bits of food in the air that Nora would catch with ease. John clapped, pleased at the display, while Ren sighed. Purah looked like she wanted to say something about it but didn't have the heart to ruin their fun. John seemed to have noticed Ruby staring and waved at her with a friendly smile. One that Ruby returned gratefully. Then she looked at her team. Weiss was filing her nails. Blake was reading a book. Yang was picking her teeth. No one was making an effort to get to know each other. This could not stand. Ruby needed to bring her team together. She needed to get them to know each other so they could be the best team at Beacon in the history of the universe. That was her dream. There was just one thing stopping her from taking charge. Her social anxiety. Her terrible social anxiety. Sure, Yang was her sister and she had actually managed to talk to some Blake before the exam. She and Weiss had also come to a bit of an understanding during the trial, but little else had come of that détente thus far. Her awkwardness was her worst enemy, as always. Weapons are so much easier to deal with, Ruby bemoaned quietly to herself, not noticing the actual moan which had snuck out. But speaking of weapons, she needed to go into town to get some more dust for Crescent Rose. Wait. That's it. With a cheer, Ruby slammed her hands on the table. This abrupt action startled the table's other occupants who could make heads nor tails of the non-sequitur declaration. Why are you shouting? Weiss scolded, looking accusingly at her partner without marking her own volume. Let's go into town this weekend, ignoring both things, Ruby propositioned her teammates and caught them by surprise. Why? Seeing little point in the effort, Blake barely even saw fit to look away from her book. So we can get to know each other, Ruby gave this upbeat response. We're a team now, so we should learn about one another. And I figure, maybe going out and doing something fun will help us become closer as a team, spreading her arms wide, she laid out the foundation of her plan and smiled hopefully at the group of teens she was supposed to be in charge of. No. Pass. Maybe next time, sis. Her hopes were dashed in an instant. At least they're coming together in rejecting me, tears streamed down the sniper's face as she tried to take solace in the silver lining. Okay, it was time to play hardball. But I think it could be fun, sullenly she kicked around a macaroni noodle which had made it to the floor, maybe go to the bookstore, with her gaze turned downwards, Blake's hand tightened around the spine of her book slightly. Check out new motorcycle parts, in the corner of her eye Yang twitched. Stuff like that, she looked over at Weiss, not really having a read on the girl's likes yet. That won't work on me, Weiss responded as if she knew the exact ploy. Very well, with all other options exhausted, it was time to release the weapon. Ruby slowly looked up from her sulk and made eye contact with Weiss, and what the white-haired girl saw made her take a step back. Again, she had underestimated this juvenile girl's capabilities. But no, it just couldn't be yet. It was there staring her right in the face. The puppy dog pout. And Ruby was turning on full blast. That wasn't fair. Wasn't there some kind of ban on such weapons of mass distraction? It certainly had enough reason, as the heiress was tormented psychologically every moment she stared into those neurological nightmares. Weiss tried to resist, truly she did. But her icy will was melted from the sheer level of cuteness. I guess it wouldn't hurt anything, she prayed this would be enough to call off the hounds. Ruby beamed at her, and it was almost worse. We're gonna be dealing with that all year, aren't we? Balefully, Blake asked the girl's sister as the foremost expert. Yep, Yang admitted with all sobriety. I've been a victim of it for years. Blake bowed her head in sympathy, incapable of imagining what it would have been like to live with such a torture lurking mere moments away. Perhaps there ought to be a recovery group for this sort of thing. Truly a fearsome weapon. Clarity. When all the amusement had been bled out of them, in Sai's case, somewhat literally, Team Kasai prepared themselves for their new handler's inspection. As a man they kept in high esteem, they wanted to be well rested and presentable when Itachi finally decided to call them in. Bodies and weapons both had been cleaned and sharpened, rough edges knocked off and finish polished to a mirror shine. Then this parade ground presentation was masked, covered over by a screenish and professionalism. Itachi was not someone you wished to cross, rather, he was someone for whom you gave your very best. As serious as their own captain most of the time, yet there was a form of understanding in Itachi's silence. An empathy which they were sorry to say the blonde lacked, but which put them at ease in his presence, even before he calmly lowered his hand to make them stand at rest. We have another mission, Itachi began without bothering with the pleasantries this time. Hence, they knew he was serious. There's another target that needs to be eliminated. But this time, we'll be playing backup. Who are we supporting? Sakura asked, unafraid of questioning the superior. Shiva's team will be taking point on this one. There was nothing in his onyx eyes to show if he was upset at having to play second fiddle, or even, that he had been demoted to babysit them again. We will be following their lead, and they have most of the mission details since they've been preparing this for a few days now. Then why do we think they will need support? Also unconcerned with who was in charge, the only thing Naruto cared about was what pertained to their survival. Because the target has been underground for some time and we have otherwise been unable to track him, Itachi patiently explained. As a stroke of luck, our informant tells us that he plans on going into Vale this Saturday. This will be our one and only chance. Given that there are still vast holes in our network, if he should disappear again, we will have no recourse to coax him out. The teens nodded, but Itachi could see the frowns that marred Sasuke and Sakura's faces. He couldn't blame them, and he was sure that there would have been one on Naruto's face as well if it were allowed. Neither did he like the stench of this mission. It was such short notice and they were going in all but blind, forced to rely on their comrades to walk them through it. Or rather, forced to trust that they were meant to walk away from it at all. We leave for Vale at 2300, Itachi continued. Be ready. Chapter 4. Target. Like birds coming in to roost, the bullheads gracefully landed in the station with a little chirp to let their passengers know that they had arrived. Civilians and huntsmen alike departed and boarded automatically, not needing this electronic signal, as a more primitive directive guided them on their course. Side by side, neither group had a care for what they came to view as a very ordinary routine. Among them but against them, a man all but tumbled down the ramp and took his first tentative steps into Vale. As if this very act were against his nature, he paranoidly scanned around the station. Alright, where to first? Startled by this loud exclamation, the man jerked around and ready to bolt when he spotted four girls walking together. The owner of the boisterous voice, a girl in a red hood, led the way for the others who were clearly not as enthusiastic about being there. Despite their innocuous display, it was a good while before he let his guard down and decided that they really were everything they appeared to be. Innocent. For a moment that was far shorter, he couldn't help but be nostalgic for those days of simplicity, both his and those youths. But those times had passed and real life had caught up to him. Albeit earlier than he had expected or wanted. How long it would last for them. For another minute moment, he thought about enjoying the sights as well. Having a good time in this beautiful city. But he had a reason for being there and he would accomplish his goal no matter what. The fallen demanded it. Clarity. Ruby strolled through the streets of Vale with a pep in her step. After a long first week of school, the day had arrived. The day that her fellow huntresses would bond and become closer as a team. All four members were there and she already knew 5 of the stops they would make. First, they would go to the bike shop so Yang could find some parts for Bumblebee, which would give her sister a chance to show her bike off to the others at the same time. Then they would head to the bookshop so Blake could browse around, maybe make some recommendations for Ruby and the others to read, although her own interest in reading usually stopped with the dialogue and comics. That would take them up to lunchtime. And if everything went right, Weiss would admit to some place she would like to visit during a friendly meal conversation. After whatever that turned out to be, they would hit the arcade and end the day in her favorite place. A weapons shop. Oh, today was going to be wonderful. Although, there was just one thing that might hinder her plans. Ruby turned around to look at her team members. Specifically, the looks of disinterest that marred their faces. Betting them to go along with today's events as they played in her head. Don't falter, Ruby, the girl berated herself mentally, fist pumping in confirmation. It'll all work out. Alright guys, let's head off to the motor shop first since that place is the closest. Ruby determined and began walking off before they could argue. Clarity. The target has arrived, the comlink crackled as they watched a male bovine Frontis walk out of the Bullhead station. Several sets of eyes, all linked by that invisible tether, tracked him from their hiding places, some being in plain sight. Is everyone in position? Medvedev and Cheval are in place, another flat voice intoned as if relating the time. In fact, the owner herself was not unlike a clock tower. Towering and lean, yet going unnoticed by the passers-by until the hour was right. Kitsune and Taka are in position, somehow conveying even less emotion. Kitsune himself related into the comm as he too disappeared into the places civilians simply didn't want to look. Iroh and Namikuji are in place, Sakura confirmed, her normal animation giving way to the mission as she joined in the monotone a cappella. Weasel and Foich in place, the calm voice of Itachi offered up for both members of the different teams. Why the hell are the pipsqueaks our backup? Not appreciating being spoken for, the Gaelic wasp buzzed at them all through the comms. Better yet, why the fuck do we have backup in the first place? You got a problem with us? This light to her team dissolved whatever professional tone Sakura had been trying to cultivate. You know that's not the case, Namikuji, Iroh stated, a humorous inflection always differentiating his emotionlessness from the others. From what I know about Lonan, she is very fond of us, but doesn't like to admit it. Boo, or rather, what fucking brain-dead mongoloid gave you retarded punks that idea? Lonan roared into the comm, almost shorting the electronics. Calm down, Lonan, another new voice offered, amusement not nearly so well disguised as sighs in his gruff voice, you know it's true. Shut it, Farrer, you horse fucker. The diminutive assassin commanded, stomping her foot against the roof of the building she was on and causing a minor tremor. You too, Neela, I can hear you laughing. Why don't you make me? Not giving an inch to her subordinate and partner, the leader of Team Shiva barked back just as fiercely as she stepped out of the alleyway and into the crowd. None so much as glanced at her, except to appreciate the graceful way her black sari shifted around her svelte frame and, unknown to them, armor hidden underneath. How about you all just shut it? Sasuke grumbled, not intending to actually broadcast this opinion, but forgetting that it was an open line for security. You don't give orders around here, duck butt. The tomboy hissed lowly but no less fiercely. Whatever paper-thin patience Lonan held had worn through long ago, and anyone who knew her could tell that she was one step away from stepping off her rooftop and clobbering whoever was unlucky enough to get in her way. But I do, the dark-skinned Neela giggled as she skipped through the streets on the heels of their mark, swaying her hips like it was music and not an argument coming through her headset. And I say, it's not nice to lie, Lonan. Neela, I swear, I'm going to kill you when this is done. But there was no bark to this, as her captain held some unknown sway over the high-strung punk that no one dared to guess at. Whatever, Neela dismissed this trite threat with an attitude that would have made Sasuke proud if he weren't busy being mortified. Kitsune, you've been quiet. As the only one here who has an opinion worth sharing, anything to add? No. Oh okay, almost physically stumbling back from this refusal which was like an icy wall, Neela backpedaled into a meek demeanor. Sorry for bothering you, she muttered, trying to simultaneously bow her head and not lose sight of their goal. Captain, please get hold of yourself. Already am, Charna, about facing in personality again, Neela resumed her serious tone in her pursuit of their target. But it is a good question that we haven't had time to address. Why are you all here? This is a rather simple mission that shouldn't take two teams. We are here because the elders ordered it. Itachi recited this reasoning with the finality of a commandment from on high, and the elders were rightfully concerned, given the high priority of this target and the lack of preparatory measures in place. Oh, that makes sense, reigniting the skip in her step, Neela responded airily, well, good to have you guys. Speak for yourself. Don't be mean, Lonan, Neela admonished sadly, head bowing beneath her gossamer burqa. We want them to like us. TCH. Target at first location, blinking, Neela's burgundy stare drunk in their location, with the awareness of many more eyes than she appeared to possess. Medvedev and Cheval moving in, the time was right for Charna to chime in once again. The conversation was over and the hands of the clock were moving. It was time to work. Clarity. Ruby's own plan for team bonding throughout the day was not going nearly so well. To say, not well at all. Everything had started out smoothly. They went to the bike shop and Yang shot off into the chaotic piles of metal to look for new parts for Bumblebee. Ruby tried to get the ball rolling by suggesting the rest of them help her sister search for parts, hoping to inspire Blake and Weiss to join in. That's not what happened. Blake simply sat in a corner and continued reading a book she had brought with her, while Weiss made it worse by saying riding a motorcycle was improper and stupid. The two didn't even agree on this boycott, standing on either side of the hangar-like shop. Needless to say, Yang probably took this worse than Ruby. The only reason she hadn't already confronted the heiress was because she wanted to help her sister in her well-meaning endeavor. But Weiss was not making it easy with all the comments she was making in the shop, nor at all, really. Continuously shooting down every attempt at friendship. Anticipating the deterioration in relations, Ruby quickly moved them on to their next destination, where in the bookshop, Blake actually put her book away. Granted, it was to look at other books, but hey. Progress. Even Weiss was contented enough to peruse the volumes on dust history and quietly scoff at the misconceptions. Unfortunately, Yang was the odd one out this time around. She was never much of a reader, so she couldn't comprehend the act of reading for fun. This she made abundantly clear when she blew off her partner who offered the blonde a raunchy adventure novel she might like. This issue was compounded when Weiss overheard the conversation and loudly decried the series as vulgar. Ruby had tried to ease the situation. But this time, all three older girls had ganged up to blow her off. No longer with any support, her plan and her mood seemingly took a turn for the worse. The girl had never been so dejected yet, sadly, this wasn't rock bottom. Humming up to the present. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Ruby suggested maybe getting something to eat. Exhausted after arguing with one another, the three girls' stomachs made this decision for them in one loud growl that killed all contentions. However, they still couldn't agree on a restaurant. What the hell is so wrong with a burger? Yang practically screamed in hunger and frustration, throwing her arms up into the air and not caring if several bystanders had to quickly leap out of the way of her argument. I will not be caught dead eating such a greasy and sloppy excuse for food. Weiss hissed, not so subtly rubbing her aching stomach. As long as there's seafood, Blake muttered, not caring one way or another, but ready to slink off and forage for herself. Are you kidding me? Ready to pull her hair out if that wasn't a blasphemy punishable by the gods themselves. Yang was ready to punish their contemptuous teammate. Food is food and money is money. You're the one trying to go to the most expensive place. I have standards, Weiss countered, wrinkling her nose as if she could already smell the grilling meat, threatening her delicate palate. Caviar is exquisite. Is it my fault the merchants here see fit to charge so much for it? What the hell even is caviar? Yang scowled, and unlike you, we all don't have the allowance to buy a house, and then some. I do not, Weiss tried to sound offended, but was going through the mental calculations while turning away to hide her growing chagrin. Either way, unless you're willing to pay for the rest of us. I barely know you people, callously, Weiss scoffed, turning back to acknowledge the blonde if only to flee her. And I was hoping to fix that, Ruby muttered weakly, trying to interject and hoping to break up the dispute. She was completely ignored. Again. But you really have to argue here. Blake grunted, finally taking notice of the people watching them as they argued. Or rather, finally deciding to risk getting involved, as no few strangers were giving them disapproving stares and whispering nastily. The hidden cat Francis shivered at the negative attention they were attracting. You two are causing a scene. Well, maybe that's a good thing. Ignoring her partner, Yang challenged, planting her hands on her hips and leering down at the haughty teen, because I don't want to get to know a flat-chested girl so stiff you'd need a primer up her ass to loosen her up. How dare you? Weiss screeched, causing several of the eavesdroppers to take a step back in pain. How can this get any worse? Clutching her own hands to her head, Ruby groaned and knelt down into a fetal position. Then the gunshots blew through the air and chaos ensued. Clarity. In contrast to most of Vale's pedestrians who were taking advantage of the beautiful day and security their city afforded them, the visiting Francis walked through the streets in a fit of anxiety and haste. Although, like a certain huntress, nothing was going his way today. Ever since he had arrived, one obstacle after another kept cropping up on the way to his destination. The first route was closed off due to maintenance. The second one had some kind of commotion going on, and he could faintly make out the chords of music. Some 2-bit pop rock group whose lyrics whined over a crowd more interested in the colorful stalls crowding the thoroughfare. The third had been cut off because of a White Fang protest against of all things another Francis protest. That one in particular had bothered him. Especially when it was clear that the humans at the street fair all but ignored the Francis simply desiring peace. Not that he could fully blame them if this was how his species acted. His fourth route was once again blocked off by what looked to simply be minor construction, and he was finally forced to consult his scroll for a detour. All the while, the man's paranoia was slowly giving out to his frustration as the clock ticked away. The level of complacency and incompetence in this city was ridiculous. Seriously, it was almost like. He stopped dead in his tracks as his mind began racing faster than his feet. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that with every change his route had become more and more convoluted. Every turn was actually taking further away from where he wanted to go. It was all laid out there on his scroll, a labyrinthine path that lazily spiraled inwards with him now at the center of the bullseye. He was being steered. Frantically, he looked around at all the people around him. At the moment he was in a plaza, and the place was bustling with people on their way to their own destinations, no way to tell which, if any, had been following him. Not too far off, he could hear some kind of argument between two girls about where to eat. Wait a second. Did he recognize those voices? Yes. But no, those girls weren't following him. He was just going around in circles. He didn't have time to waste on them, he was too busy trying to figure out who. Then his eyes landed on her. Why, he couldn't quite be sure, as there wasn't anything to decry her as extraordinary. She was airily skipping through the streets, only vaguely heading in his direction, but could have just as easily been going to any number of shops, even to meet up with those other 4 girls he had seen. Yet. He had seen her everywhere. He hadn't been paying attention at the time, but as his mind went into overdrive and replayed the recent snapshots of his journey, he became sure of it. She had been there every time his route had to change. In all honesty, he wouldn't have noticed her even then. Never the most suspicious of people by nature, but his paranoia had been rising since the day he committed himself to do this. To come to Vale and confess. His fear his guilty conscience had possibly saved his life. But then he looked up at the girl and gulped as her eyes met his. Maybe his fear had just delayed the inevitable long enough for him to be fully aware of what was about to happen. Those cold eyes did not match that warm, cheerful smile on her face and promised a very grim fate for what had been a beautiful day. Animal instinct kicked in, fight or flight. He chose the obvious and turned around to run for his life, but found that he simply couldn't. The very instincts that were urging him to flee were also freezing him up. Overwhelmed in awareness, he now felt multiple eyes upon him. Eyes that exorcised his very soul. He was going to die. That was the only logical conclusion he could come to. For even as fear had fully taken a hold of his body, his mind remained cruelly sober. Thus, it was no surprise to him that when he collapsed onto the ground in a ball, bullets rang out into the air. He just didn't expect to be alive to hear it. Clarity. What the hell is happening? Hearing but not seeing the gunshots echoing over the buildings and into the alleyway in which they were hiding, Namikuji barked into the comms and awaited the milliseconds to an answer. The White Fang has attacked the city, Kitsune answered, almost disappointedly, as he watched the people in the streets begin to panic. Fuck. Lonan exclaimed as the listeners all winced, why the hell weren't we told about this being a possibility? It's likely our intelligence didn't know, Iroh guessed clinically, lack of info was the issue which brought us on board in the first place. Plus, White Fang attack patterns have changed up in the last couple of months, making them fairly unpredictable. As no help, with a combination sigh and shrug, Charna herself had all but expected complications to arise even before they heard about their additional team. Mission goes on. Whatever, growling, Neela dodged the throngs of people running in the opposite direction as she kept a beady crimson eye on the bull faunus. I still have a clear strike for the target, flexing her fingers, her intricately painted and sharpened nails appeared to grow in anticipation. The poison mixed with purple polish glistened through the sweat of the panicking crowd. Make it look like an accident, unperturbed, Weasel instructed as he watched from a roof nearby. From his vantage, clearly picking out the 2 swimming upstream. Roger, Roger, Neela quipped playfully as she swam towards her target. Sorry, we can't make it quick, a sincere apology echoed in her head, yet there was still a bloodthirsty grin on her face, but it has to look like an accident. Nails clacking in contrast to her silent footsteps, she neared the man who was being jostled by the people trying to flee the terror. He looked up from his own debilitating panic to see a mask staring at him. Then he saw the other 5 faces, demons painted on the 5 menacing points waggling at him. Fear filled his eyes as they approached, and he closed his eyes, waiting for the cackling monsters to tear him apart and take him to hell where he belonged. Only, he felt nothing. "Can't let you do that," chancing to open his eyes, the man looked up in disbelief to see someone standing between him and his would-be killer. Neela hummed in disappointment as she felt her fingers scream in agony and frustration. The newcomer's battle axe now sported 5 parallel marks, but the demons painted on her nails were weeping tears of blood. The huntsman had arrived. "Sorry, but this bloke hired us to keep him alive," the man smirked in confidence as he blocked Neela's attempted assassination. Through his massive legs, the intended target began crawling away and disappeared into the chaos of the streets. From behind her mask, which sported the serene countenance of a multi-faced god, Neela didn't say a word. She simply clicked her tongue in frustration at the situation. This was not supposed to happen. Damn terrorists. Clarity. From her position near Itachi, Lonan growled and withdrew her Tetsubmen in preparation to go help her captain. She wouldn't get the chance. Well, what do we have here? With a groan of having to endure such a cliched line, Lauren turned around to see a plucky, brightly hued young woman spinning two swords in her hands. Another huntress. The target had hired a team. We've been compromised, Neela broke in calmly through the comms. I can fucking see that, Lonan seethed as she eyed her new opponent. She gnashed her teeth and wrung her iron-studded bat in her hands as she anticipated bashing out this prissy little princess's smile. Actually, that was a real question. I can't tell if you're a boy or a girl, the huntress queried as she eyed the androgynous assassin up and down. Both Lauren and her rage froze at the statement. Well, if you are a girl, then I feel kind of bad. They have surgery for that kind of thing, you know, not that I've ever needed it. Shrugging, the huntress incidentally flaunting her own assets, but don't worry, I'm sure there are guys out there that like that type. That was it. Mission or no, this bitch was going to die. Clarity. Ducking under a swing from the man, Neela threw a few shuriken his way, but he moved to the side and let them sail past, not bothering to cover his blind spots. Seeing his confidence, some would say arrogance, she could also hear the disseminated sounds of combat and knew what that meant. He wasn't alone. But neither was she. Tall and stout, Charna and Farah landed equally gracefully next to her as they eyed the huntsman behind their own masks of a bear and a horse. As they watched unblinkingly, he was joined by his own two companions. The huntsmen were stronger. Neela could tell just by looking at them the way they carried themselves and moved like the apex predators they were. Unlike with Team 7, there was no shame in admitting this disparity. Unlike their fellow assassins, the huntsmen were older, more experienced. If this fight got drawn out, then they would lose eventually. Time was already running out. Their target was getting away, and there was no way they would find him if he disappeared again. At least, not like this. So, what should she do? I have eyes on the target. Her answer came in the form of Kitsune. Clarity. I have eyes on the target, Kitsune said into the comm, ignoring the impending confrontation and focusing on the squirming form of the Faunus man. We can take him out. If you have a chance, then take it, Neela instructed, already feeling it was unnecessary, but also knowing Kitsune wouldn't usurp her leadership without her explicit order. Use your own discretion, but see if you can't lead him into an alley or something first. With the panic, we can still get out of this without compromising our existence even more, she continued. My team will keep the do-gooders busy. I'll provide backup for Team Shiva, Weasel spoke, taking stock of the situation in all but an instant and making the call. Kitsune, take point. Understood, he responded, the barest hint of eagerness in his voice, which might have been disregarded as static. Let's move. And they were off. Clarity. Not as panicked as the people all around her, Ruby looked around in concern as she and her team got separated amidst the helter-skelter. People were running around in an aimless panic away from the gunshots which now seemed to be coming from multiple directions and confusing their flight. Ruby looked on as people pushed and shoved each other to get away from the attack, not caring that they hurt each other in the least. They were like animals. Among this chaos, she even saw a Faunus man crawling on the dirty ground, trying desperately to get away. She watched as people began trampling on him. Hey. Her altruistic instinct kicking in, Ruby began pushing through the crowd to get to the man with the aid of her semblance. When she finally reached him, she plucked him from the human tide and dragged him to a building and sat him against a wall. Are you okay? She asked, leaning over the hyperventilating man as he looked around frantically. You have to help me. Still whipping his neck back and forth, he seemed to ask this of anyone willing to listen. They're here for me. Who is? Ruby asked, holding the man's shoulders, trying to calm him down. She meant it in a conciliating way, but betwixt the urgency and her own sinking suspicion, it somehow came out as a demand. They're going to. Going to what? Ruby pressed, though she had a horrible feeling she already knew the answer. Who's coming for you and why? Then she felt it. The piercing gaze that bore into the back of her head. No, they weren't looking at her. They were looking through her. Slowly, she turned around and glanced up at the roof of a nearby building, as if she knew exactly where it was. They were a distance away, but Ruby could see it as it existed in her darkest nightmares. The black mask of the Kitsune was plain as day. His eyes, emptier than the blue sky behind them, were clearly upon her. She could tell even behind those incising slits. Too late, Ruby realized what the man was trying to say. They're here to kill me. Chapter 5. Again. Hold on. Ruby ordered as she slung the man's arm around her and hauling his larger frame upon her shoulders. Without giving him a chance to consent, without giving herself a chance to think about what she was doing, she activated her semblance and shot off to put some distance between herself and the assassins. She was not going to let a repeat of the forest happen here. She knew they were already behind her, darting from roof to roof like some dogged fleas, trying to catch up and sink its teeth into them. Without looking back, she had no idea how many of them there were, or who they were, or why they wanted to kill this man. She only knew one. She remembered him. How could she ever forget? Clarity. He remembered her. Not that he would forget, anyway. It was the girl from the forest. The semblance had been a dead giveaway. A speed semblance of all things. It was the worst possible thing for them right now. The whole thing was against all probability. It would be difficult for Iroh and Namekuji to keep up if they ended up chasing her from street level. Stick to the rooftops, the blonde ordered even as his booted foot propelled him off a tottering brick edge with nary a sound. Her semblance gives her an advantage in a straight run, but we should be able to outmaneuver her. What do you want us to do? The raven-masked teen asked as he ran next to him, not looking at the target or his feet, but the emotionless countenance of his captain. Take advantage of the chaos, Naruto responded, himself not eschewing sight of the red blur weaving in and out of the fleeing pedestrians far below. Force them into the alleys as planned. That will give her less room to maneuver. But we don't know the extent of her speed, Namekuji countered through the comms. How do we know she won't just plow through us if given a chance to go all out? As it is, she seems to be slowing down to avoid civilians. She won't escape, Naruto declared with a finality. The darkness in this statement was ironically the most emotion they'd heard from their leader and made the lot question whether they desired to try and coax out more. They're already nearing the harbor. That will severely limit our options. From there, we will force her choices, returning to business. He laid out his plan to the team to finish the mission. Is that understood? Naruto asked, leaping onto another roof which gave him a bird's eye view of the entire district. Yes. Loud and clear. HN. Good, Naruto nodded to the stalwart chorus. What should we do if she should resist? Taka dared ask, being the only one who probably could. Naruto didn't respond to him immediately, and so he pressed an answer, she's still a civilian as far as we know. We'll deal with her accordingly when the time comes. The Black Mask gave nothing as to what this meant. Though they all expected that. Their captain, their friend, didn't feel anything. Not anymore. Clarity. Ruby pushed through the crowd at a mild clip for her semblance. She would be going faster, but there were too many people in the way. It didn't help that the man wasn't doing much to make her rescue easier as he clutched to her like a cat afraid of the water. Then again, she'd probably be panicking too if people were attempting to kill her. She weaved through the chaotic streets as best she could with the bumbling man, feeling like she was participating in the most high-stakes game of egg race in her life. The goal was to get him to the police station, which should be somewhere around here if memory served. She was gambling on the fact that the assassins wouldn't be brazen enough to attack a police station in broad daylight. From there she could call for huntsmen and huntresses, and hopefully they would be able to protect the man from whatever additional threat was backing up her fox-masked pursuer. At least, that's what she was hoping for. Thankfully, despite the slow pace, the assassins were keeping their distance. They don't want to be seen, Ruby deduced, taking confidence in this for her plan. They probably hadn't wanted to in the forest either, but their hand had most likely been forced. That's what Ruby thought anyway, though if she had really thought about it, she'd been the ones to force it back then, too. Maybe she could use the chaos to her advantage. The police station was only few blocks away. All she had to do was get out of the pandemonium that was the plaza, and she could cut loose. The odds were in her favor this time around. There was no way for their pursuers to get close to them, and there were too many people in the way to get a clear shot, with the White Fang's interference still causing pandemonium. She already knew from previous experience that they couldn't keep up with her semblance. I can do this, Ruby thought confidently. That all changed when the full-grown lion leapt in front of her. What the heck? She yelled in shock, planting her feet into the ground and stopping just in time to avoid crashing into a mother and child who had been running in the opposite direction before the lion showed up. The beast's sudden appearance sent the people into an even larger panic because dealing with assassins and terrorists wasn't enough, apparently. Roaring and snapping in anger at anyone who approached it, yet what seemed weird to Ruby was how the exotic predator never really tried to pursue anybody. And now that she thought about it, the lion looked strange, almost like it wasn't real. But she didn't have time to really think about it. She could feel his eyes on her back, burning like a candle wick. Not giving the non sequitur another thought, she turned on the melted heel of her boot and bolted off in the other direction. Blitzing through the streets as fast she could, while in her head she was calculating another route to take the man. Not done yet, she whispered to herself with a wry smirk. Now she moved through the streets as fast as her legs could take them both, relying on her reflexes to avoid running into any more people or escaped zoo creatures. I'm sorry, at last calming down enough to speak, the man's voice was barely above her own whisper as it contended against the rushing winds. You have nothing to be sorry for, she stated. Adrenaline and more urgent matters blocking the girl's usual inhibition when talking to strangers. But you shouldn't be involved in this, he stated with concern, the ghost of authority in his voice unable to catch up, they might kill you too. "Don't worry about it," Ruby said. "It's what I do." There was a grim inflection to this assurance despite the smile she cast back at the man. He had gone silent once again and Ruby didn't feel the need to urge him to resume talking. But she could feel his weight lift off her slightly. He was running with her now trying, anyway. That would make things easier. "I'll get you to the police station. You should be safe there," Ruby told him. The man didn't say anything, but she could still hear his footsteps indicating he was still with her. They were so close now. Just a few more yards and they would have room to breathe. Then she could really use her semblance and get the man to their destination. Their goal was in sight. Of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. Hail to the White Fang. We will be heard. It seemed that the White Fang decided to occupy her escape route. She couldn't distinguish them from the other bodies, but what she could hear was enough justification for her next action. Without hesitation, she switched directions once again. She grabbed the man's hand and all but yanked him down another road that was only slightly out of their way. They pushed through the crowd same as before, as Ruby continued mentally rerouting a new path. But it seemed that life was not on her side today at all. The sunny day darkened quickly as Ruby felt a shadow over her head and saw a large statue falling towards them. "Look out," Ruby shouted as she threw herself and the man into a nearby alley just as the statue hit the ground. This only seemed to increase the panic as the crack resounded all up and down the grid-like streets, marble shards shooting off in every direction like a grass-cutter bomb. Ruby could only hope that all of this was limited to the plaza and surrounding area. Because if this was happening all across the city, she shuddered at the thought of the amount of grim that would swarm the place. But first things first, she had a different adversary to deal with. "We have to go," the red-hooded girl urged as she and the man pressed deeper into the narrow passage. She didn't want to use back alleys, but with all the calamity going on out in the streets, it seemed she didn't have any choice. That thought caused her to pause. The strange lion, the gunshots but no White Fang in sight, then the statue. "It's a trap," she whispered, realizing this at the same moment she realized that they were no longer alone in that alley. Clarity. Shadowy gargoyles loomed over them from the roofs and posted sentinel on the entrances and exits of the alleyway like shishi. Their target and the annoying obstacle were surrounded from four sides by Kitsune and his team, who congealed from the shadows and stony facade of the buildings. In contrast to everything that had gone wrong previous, it had been almost too easy to move their targets where they wanted. All that was left to do was to make the kill, and the mission would be complete, their honor redeemed. The leering figures came alive and crept towards the huddled man and teen. Dropping down from the eaves and slinking from either entrance of the alley in a silence that set them apart from the pandemonium echoing overhead. "Enough time has been wasted," the young leader thought, wearing the darkness like a mantle of authority of life and death. "I'll end this now." He pulled his ninjato out and moved forward. A stab through the temple and it would be done. He edged closer, but before he could consummate the deed, he found his eyes covered by a red blur. He felt more than saw the swing of a familiar weapon and was forced to jump back, preventing him from making the finishing blow. Looking up from his defensive crouch at the girl surrounded in a flurry of rose petals, she met his stare dead in the eyes. Her next words were deafening in the cacophony that was still going on around them. "Not again." Clarity. Ruby held crescent rows between them as she stared down the black-masked assassin, crouched against the dank ground with his sword flittering low like a tail in anticipation of her next move. Her eyes darted around, recognizing that this was the exact same group of assassins that she had encountered in the forest. They might have been cut from the same cloth, but there were differences to their uniforms, enough to set them apart in her mind. All three including Kitsune wielded ninjato, one held a full sword which she could now see was a tachi rather than katana, as the straight edge lined up parallel with the alley's brickwork. In addition to their unique masks, the rest of their heads were swaddled in hoods instead of the inky shadows like she'd first assumed. But it was still easy enough to distinguish them even without these calling cards. Ruby reckoned she'd be able to pick them out of a crowd simply by the feeling they gave off, the way they moved like hyenas, hungry for their supper. And then there was the parted mouth of Kitsune leering at her. "Not again," she repeated, more to herself than to the murderer. "Not again." "Little girl," the man whispered with grim resignation, using her as support one last time so that he could stand. "Thank you for your help. But you should get out of here. You don't want to see what comes next." "It's too late for that," Ruby whispered back with the same morbid acceptance as the marked man. "I am a huntress in training," she reinforced, drawing pride and righteousness with this title. The fox mask nodded almost approvingly and two of the assassins moved. So did Ruby. She swung her scythe in a 360-degree arc, forcing the flanking assassins back. The moment she stopped she pulled the trigger, blasting her towards the one who hadn't moved. Not expecting the girl to come at them offensively, they just barely dodged her hastily planned tackle. But Ruby wasn't done, swinging the large weapon around with ease and knocking the enemies aside into the air. The assassin recovered quickly before he even hit the ground, but she would have to ignore him for now. She popped 3 shots loosely aimed at the other assassins, indicating that she hadn't forgotten them. Taking the opportunity while they were off guard, the girl sped towards the man she was protecting and grabbed him, attempting to run back into the streets and out of the alley, which had become a raccoon trap. She wouldn't get the chance as the fist tightened and another one of the assassins moved to intercept her. The one with the long sword was the one that had begun to engage her. The added steel allowed the raven-masked assassin to reach farther with his strikes, all but negating her prior advantage. And much to her horror and chagrin, they proved just as fast. No. They might be even faster in terms of attack. She pushed the man towards the ground before the surprisingly quick strike could decapitate them both, though she could see a few strands of hair flutter to the ground. Lucky for them Yang wasn't here. But watching her hair fall was when she noticed the approaching shadow. Trying to give them room to breathe, she twisted crescent rose and fired it at the sword wielder. This also served to push her and the man backwards, smacking right into another assassin's chest and knocking the wind out of them. Ruby knew she wouldn't be able to keep up this deadly game much longer. Yes, she and her crescent rose shined when it came to fighting large groups, and that was probably the only reason she had been able to keep the man alive as long as she had thus far. It hadn't even occurred to her that the assassins were trying not to harm her. But she could still tell that these guys were as strong, if not stronger than she was, individually. And there was the added tactical disadvantage of being in the close quarters, which negated almost all her assets. Not to mention, there were 4 of them and only 1 of her. But above all that in her mind, there was one thing that was bothering her more than anything else. The one which had yet to move, his fox mask fixated and the ninjato clenched in his hand. Throughout the entire scuffle she had felt his eyes on her, just like when she was running through the streets. It was like he was a predator and she was his prey. No, not her. The man she was protecting was the prey. She was just an obstacle blocking his path. And that thought made her mad. "I'm right here," she growled, clenching crescent rose tighter and baring it like an animal bares their teeth. "What are you waiting for? Come and get me." She watched for any hint of reaction, but the only one to be taken aback was she herself as the other assassins responded to her invitation. From under her guarded stance, an inky black dog snapped up her weapon in its maw and tried to wrench it from her grip. The hound looked like it had been practically birthed from the sludge of sowers, and her opinion was only reinforced when she managed to yank her scythe away and the creature seemingly splattered against the alley wall like graffiti. There was no time for second opinions as the disposable beast served its purpose, distracting her from the fist careening towards her blind spot. Suddenly Ruby was the one sent flying, rag-dolling against the same wall as the canine. Unfortunately, she was not nearly as pliable. Although, Ruby was almost used to such blows and recovered relatively quickly. Because she had taken such punches from her sister, she now had a reliable metric to compare their strengths. Looking at the one who hit her, she was sure that the cap-wearing woman. She couldn't really tell with the armor, mask, and way in which they all swirled in her vision, was at least on par with her sister. Also, that she had pulled the last punch. And that thought made her fearful. But not about to back down, nor was Ruby going to sit idly by as the swordsman ran her through. Through some sixth sense, she heard him coming and moved herself out of the way before she was disarmed. Again, she should have been grateful that they weren't really trying to harm her. And in her gratitude, she jabbed a haft of crescent rose in his face and followed it up with a low swing which made him back off. All too eager to give herself distance, Ruby blasted backwards and away from the young man who could match her cut for cut straight into a tangle of drawn lines that were more like snakes. Dispatching the scribbles with almost no resistance, she almost buckled under the immense weight of another of the female's blows. "No time for this," she grunted, falling to her knees and taking a gamble by darting through the female assassin's wide stance. Aiming for the man, she batted away a strike from the assassin who must have been invoking the animals. And in a whirlwind of movement, she swept his legs out from underneath. "Come on." Grabbing the man's hand, she was all but ready to barge their way out of the alley with her semblance. Even if she ended up dislocating the man's shoulder, at least he would be alive. Accidentally or not, the downed artist had one more card to play as Ruby slipped on the spilled ink and lost her footing. Both she and the man were sent tumbling down the alley closer to the exit, but not close enough, and she quickly had to drag them both out of the path of a flurry of shuriken. Heaving them to their feet, Ruby backed up and evaded another attack from the sword user, only to receive a devastating punch to her side from out of nowhere, which sent her skidding. Unfortunately, while she could take the pain, the hand linking her to the man was suddenly severed and she was forced apart from him. In the close quarters chaos, she at least had managed to hook the assassin that hit her and sent her flying as well. That was his chance. She saw the kitsune move just as she came to a rolling stop. Blade at the ready, he darted at the man in a burst of speed that she'd have been hard-pressed to follow, even if her head hadn't been swimming. No. Slinging herself with crescent rows, she skidded to a halt in front of the man between him and death. He was too close. She was out of bullets, hardly expected a prolonged battle on her day off. And her aura was low, which meant she couldn't use her semblance to get them both away. There was nothing she could do. She had failed. Offering everything she had left, she held her arms out wide to shield the man from the looming strike. With the oncoming blow too close to redirect, it was all she could do. It wasn't enough. She would either perish instantly or stumble, be dismissed as easily as Weiss had done upon first meeting her. Rather than close her eyes to the inevitable, she looked up at her would-be killer. And at this distance, she could make out his blue eyes even more clearly if it were possible to get to the bottom of those empty abysses. Not again. She proclaimed, defiantly awaiting the possibly fatal blow. Get the hell away from her. Tables were turned, and Kitsune had no chance to alter his course as he felt a fist impact his mask, sending him back in a tizzy. Able to concentrate on something other than her demise, Ruby looked around and noticed that others had joined them in the alley. No, not others. Trouble seems to just follow you, doesn't it? I'm pretty sure this isn't what you had in mind for a day out. I dare any of you to lay a hand on her again. Her team. Her team. She couldn't help the smile that made its way onto her face at this thought and the feeling of relief which came with it. Naruto stumbled from the haymaker he should have seen coming. Thankfully, his mask didn't break from the powerful blow and reveal his dissatisfied scowl. Readjusting his porcelain face, he felt his team regroup next to him as together they stared down the group of four now protecting their target. Two of them he recognized from the forest and the other one was the Schneeris. Assessing the situation now, he took a page from an old acquaintance. Troublesome. Surrender now. Brandishing Mertenister and a barely restrained fury, Weiss commanded the gathered assassins. I've already contacted the authorities and other huntsmen will be here soon to take you all in. She held her sword aloft and pointed at her enemies. Don't make this harder on yourselves. TCH, Taka grunted in frustration. She was bluffing. She had to be. He took a half step forward, regarding her too stiff stance with contempt and gauging the others just as clinically. They could win. But could they risk that? Please don't surrender, the blonde brawler seethed as she punched her fists together, sparking an explosion in that confined space. Please give me a reason, she growled, her eyes repeatedly shifting from lilac to red as she dragged them over the opposing team. Aicho, what do we do? Namakuji asked, bringing her fists up as she was clearly prepared for a fight. Saying nothing, Iroh held his ninjato in a reverse grip while Taka took an ox stance with his katana challenging the white-haired heiress. At their captain's order they would all re-engage, rush to their deaths with all the surety and celerity of a guillotine. In the moment before it dropped, Kitsune examined the situation. In terms of numbers they were now on equal ground and more huntsmen were heading their way to shift the balance further away from their advantage. There was only one solution. His eyes roved back to meet hers once again. The defiance in her stare hadn't left even now, showing no change from when she was all by herself against the four of them. It was clear she would fight them no matter what. Retreat. The order came low and severely and the team almost couldn't believe their ears. They hesitated for a moment but one by one they nodded. You're not going anywhere. Yang roared as she leapt at them with a cocked fist. Before Ruby could dissuade her sister, Namakuji stepped forward to meet her punch with one of her own. What followed was a shockwave that expanded to fill the alley and pushed the huntresses back, having not expected the counterattack nor the extreme reaction. This was especially so for Yang, who had only ever seen her father and uncle meet an attack with her semblance head-on. And even they were forced back, if even a little. This one hadn't even budged. Filled with equal parts anxiousness and excitement at the thought of an equal, Yang looked ready to continue. But before she could rear another attack, her vision was blurred by smoke. No you don't. Weiss asserted to herself, scowling after having recovered from the force of the shockwave. Revolving Mertenister's chamber, she imbued gale dust into her rapier and sent a slash forward to dissipate the smokescreen. But by the time it cleared, the four assassins were already gone. Clarity. To think it would have been them of all people to interfere, Namakuji muttered contemplatively, rubbing her fist in thought more than soreness as she and her team stood on a rooftop far away from the screaming sirens and forlorn wails. The frustration between the three of them was palpable, more than the smoke slowly rising in the distance. They had failed the mission. There was no way they could whitewash it, no other way to spin things to rationalize it. They also knew exactly where the council would attempt to put the blame, and that in turn made them want to blame themselves all the more. Even if they had followed his orders to the letter, to place it all on his shoulders. We failed, Taka scowled, looking for something to cut to alleviate the burdensome feeling of uselessness. But the information we received was faulty, Iroh argued, rationally but weakly. That doesn't matter to them when we're involved, his raven-haired teammate retorted dismally, at last settling for just kicking a rotating air vent that had rusted long ago. But the huntsman team he hired was handled by Shiva, he interrupted before his socially inept teammate could further irritate him, they'll come at us for not taking one girl out. The rules say we can't harm civilians. Behind her mask, Namikuji was biting her lips pensively. But I doubt that will help our situation. This is Jin's doing, Taka growled, his grip tightening on his sword as he contemplated using it again. For the past few missions we haven't been receiving enough information to act properly. As it is, this mission had way too many holes in it from the beginning. Which probably only makes it easier for that snake to cover his tracks. This is bullshit, the only female on the team growled. It doesn't matter. The trio turned to look at their leader as he held his mask in his hand. There were a few cracks in it. He would need to get a new one. The mission is a failure, he stated. There was never any beating around the bush with him, only the straightest path to success. Plain and simple. But Namikuji interjected but stopped because at the end of the day that was true. We simply cannot fail again. We didn't fail in the last one, Taka countered, not willing to let their leader assume responsibility on his own and not willing to let him disparage the team, either. One is enough, Kitsune stated. Something within his team was lit at that statement. They didn't disagree with him. What about the girl? Curiosity got the better of Iroh, and he asked. That's the second time we've run into her. Kitsune was silent for a moment as a pair of silver eyes flashed through his mind. You think it's coincidence? There was the misfortune of their missions which could be tracked to a specific individual. And then there was the pervasive bad luck which had dogged him for his entire life. It was so much easier to feel nothing than to feel each transgression levied against him, and what he tried to accomplish every nick, cut, scrape, gash, slash and blow was nothing compared to the knowledge that no matter what he did, it wasn't good enough. If she thought she was better, he would prove her wrong. It has been confirmed that they are indeed huntresses in training and no longer prospects. The blonde judged with the detachment of an executioner as he stood up and began to retrace the way to the rendezvous. This means they are no longer civilians in our eyes. His team waited a bit before they followed in silence. There was nothing to say and nothing they could say to their obviously perturbed leader. His behavior was strange enough, removing his mask in the field. But there was also the unspoken hidden kiss which only they had learned to read like the screenplay of the tragedy which was Naruto Uzumaki. Things had changed and this pronouncement only confirmed it. But alas, it also took matters out of their hands. Clarity. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? I'll demolish all of them. Yang, for the 11th time, I'm fine, Ruby huffed as her sister checked her over once again. They were standing just outside the alley while the professional huntsmen surrounded the area that was being cordoned off by police. Well, that's good to hear, Blake added as she watched the two sisters' antics with amusement. Honestly, can't you stay out of trouble? In contrast, Weiss regarded the same scene with irritation. Though Blake could see the relief in her eyes and knew she was glad that the younger girl hadn't been hurt too bad. But it was more than that, and Blake was not to know how she underestimated the heiress's fear and hatred of those people. She may have had the sharp eyes of a feline, but she just couldn't see this flaw that linked them. Sorry for worrying you guys, Ruby apologized, rubbing the back of her head and mussing up the hair that her sister had tried to reorder. I just couldn't let them kill that man, she glanced over at the would-be victim as he talked to a couple of the huntsmen. I couldn't let that happen a second time. The three older girls were silent for a moment as her words settled with each of them. Death was something that none of them would want to see, let alone twice. It's just sad that today didn't go as planned for us, the sniper sighed, lamenting her carefully laid plans which had gone awry. I was really looking forward to team bonding, not that it was going well in the first place. The older girls exchanged guilty looks realizing that had been their fault even before the White Fang attacked and the day went to heck in handbasket. Well, the day's not over, Weiss began with a certain caution, and my curiosity on burgers might have been piqued, she admitted, hand drifting towards her now cavernous stomach. Ruby looked up in surprise at her partner's words. Could it be? Yeah, and maybe afterward you can show me that book you recommended, Yang added. Only if you take me for a spin on your bike, Blake smirked, playing along. Her name's Bumblebee, Yang beamed. This was it. This was what she had hoped for. It was small, but it was a start. A real start to becoming a real team. Just a little longer, Ruby thought happily. Then a thought crossed her mind. How did you guys know where to find me anyway? Ruby asked. Tracker in your scroll, Blake answered before Yang could stop her. What? Ruby shouted in shock, whipping out the device and scouring it for signs of tampering. Blake. Yang hissed. Yang, you knew about this? Ruby hollered, glaring at the older girl. Yang laughed nervously as she took a few steps back. But that was not able to save her as a red blur leapt at her, enticing a tussle in the middle of the street. I have a feeling this is going to be a normal scene for us. Enthusiasm waning slightly, Blake put the anticipation aside for the moment and enjoyed the interaction with the detachment of a remote viewer. Bolts, Y sighed, head sinking into her hand. Clarity. There you are. The demoralized members of Team 7 paused briefly in their approach to see if they couldn't glean the exact shade of red glowing from behind Shiva's mask. The hue would determine how they should handle the tripolar captain. We did signal you that we were cutting comms, rather, most of Kitsune's team was so cautious, but Iroh had no such compunction and wandered blindly into the hornet's nest. Besides, I doubt we slowed you down much. From the look of things, your team needs a bit more time to recover. In contrast to Naruto's morally wounded team, Neela's was just plain bedraggled, wrung out and hung up wet. None of their masks could be considered a shade of white anymore, and all were sporting at least a few bumps and bruises, in addition to a weary, hangdog air about them. No thanks to you, you lazy fucks. All except for Lonan, who was barely recognizable as a person but continued to be as volatile as her persona. Though cuts littered her scrawny body, she could barely keep still under the ministrations of Yumifair, now that he had his mask off. It was a testament to his skill, as well as her hot-headedness, that he could even see what he was doing behind all that blood. And try to be more careful with those meaty hands of yours, farm boy. Like you can even feel anything, Farah grumbled as he wiped off some more grime with a spit-covered rag and finished stitching a long gash on her arm with a quick knot and a snip. Even if you weren't hopped up on painkillers, I doubt any of your nerve endings are still functioning, Plancha Mia. There was more blood on the petite assassin than anyone could have thought she had in her twig-like body, but that didn't preclude the pearly white grin from splitting through the crimson. I'll bet that little cunt wishes she couldn't feel anything after I got through with her. Chuckling darkly, Lonan fished something out of her shredded trousers and rattled them in her hands for the rest to see. Looks like I got the last laugh and smile, bitch. Even as a medic, Namikuji balked at the sight of loose teeth in the wasp's palm. Suzumabachi, you know the rules about trophies. If Team 7 wasn't sure before, now they knew Neela was mad, even with the calm fury turned away from them. Aw, come on Captain. It's just a little joke. Lonan, too sweetly cocking her head and smiling behind the mask which showed but one face of an all-inclusive god, if you don't want those to be replacements, I suggest you get rid of them. Fine. That aside, 3 out of 4 on Team 7 flinched as the schizophrenic team captain turned to them, it's good to see you 4 return safely. That's because it means more paperwork if we kicked it. Taka grumbled, leaning against the same wall as Kuma, but hardly noticing she was even there. Well, there is that, Neela smirked, we're already going to be in enough trouble for failing as it is. It would be a permanent blight on our records if we misplaced our cute little Kohai as well. Wait, why the hell would we get in trouble? Farah blurted out before any on Team 7 could comment. Because, Dumbus, we were the ones calling the shots. The masks did not hide their surprise as it was Lonan who came to their defense, begrudgingly. Not blaming her, but Neela was the one who sent the trained hound after the target while we were busy with our heads up our asses. I knew we should have handled things by ourselves. And then where would we be? Their captain asked rhetorically as she glanced behind her to see how her fellow leader reacted to the trained dog comment. Like it or not, things just didn't play out in our favor today. I think we should just be glad that this didn't turn into a total snafu. Right, Itachi? Materializing from the shadows, the older assassin joined their cabal and laid a soft hand on Kitsune's shoulder. All the plaza cameras have been neutralized and I am all but certain the authorities will be chasing ghosts until all the real evidence has disappeared. Thanks for the help with that, Kuma. The lanky girl nodded solemnly, causing Sasuke to seemingly notice her next to him for the first time. Then, we're done here. A glance around showed the allied leader a quick nod from Itachi, a grunt from Farah and Lonan trundling to her feet with the help of her Tetsubo as a cane. Awesome. Let's get a move on. When we get back, ice cream sundaes in the mess, on me. Not that it isn't appreciated, Namikuji prefaced, hesitant to provoke the clearly unstable woman. But what are we celebrating? As near as any of them could tell, there was nothing good that came out of that day worth mentioning. Oh, we're not, somehow slipping both the pink-haired girl and her own grumbling tomboy under her arms at the same time, Neela held up a finger with another arm to make her point. But don't ya think we could all really use one? As a medic, Sakura found it hard to argue. Make it a beer float and you got yourself a deal. Don't you mean a root beer float? Nope. She proclaimed, popping the pea. You know, I might have misjudged ya, Pinky. Naruto, as the other assassins trailed after the increasingly disturbing conversation, Itachi caught the defamed captain standing stock still with his clenched fist, slowly leaking blood onto the tiled roof. Are you alright? The young assassin didn't acknowledge his mentor, continuing to stare after the amicable interactions of the others, with a quaver racking his entire body. With his hand still on the unsleeved shoulder, Itachi gave a squeeze which appeared to reset whatever thought had frozen behind Kitsune's unfeeling black mask. Haicho. Naruto, Itachi repeated, are you sure you're alright? Cocking his head ever so fox-like, never would Itachi admit it, but the sight sent shivers down his spine. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Cowardly. Ruby walked in silence as she listened to her team interact with one another. A completely different feeling than earlier in the day when they had set out on their adventure. This was what she had wanted, her team together like this. There was still a certain distance between them, but that was to be expected, to be accepted as small price to pay. Slowly her thoughts shifted through the day until something fully set in with her. I did it, Ruby whispered to herself in disbelief, and she couldn't help the smile that blossomed across her face in the light of this fact. She had protected someone successfully. She had beat him. But her thoughts shifted to their two encounters. The one last time. And once was too much. Little was she to know of the similar thoughts being mirrored on the other side of the city. They each had one loss and one win. Somehow, they both knew that they would meet each other again. It was an inevitability more than statistics could prove, more than something as simplistic as fate could predict. It was a desire and determination in both which ignited at the same time and unwittingly guided their actions to make it true. Next time we meet, they both thought. I'll stop him. I'll kill her. Chapter 6. Pattern. So hey, honestly now, what do you tell your wife you do when you get home? All while manacled and being manhandled into a waiting police car, the greasy-haired man bantered amicably between the two plainclothes officers who each had a firm grip on his shoulders. Though it was Vale's law to be innocent until proven guilty, the average passerby would have a hard time not condemning him right then and there, with his slick clothes and confident smirk, which clearly stated he was above the law, even if he was being lowered into the waiting cop car. Because I mean really, you know Junior's gonna have me out in a day or two, 3 tops. He also wasn't doing much to hide his contempt. There was an ironic pleasure behind his eyes as if he were a masochist enjoying how his arms were being twisted painfully behind him. Though he was probably imagining the pleasure he was going to have when the situation was reversed. Although, with the gentle way you handle a man, I'm beginning to wonder if you two aren't partners. I must say, that would make home life rather common. The car door slammed shut, cutting off his insults and nearly his nose. The officers couldn't be sure and frankly by that point simply didn't care. Motherfucker. The clean-shaven cop turned around and swore, uncaring for the raised eyebrows and passing mothers who gave him a dirty look. He felt unclean enough as it was. Easy Gray, his partner assuaged, yet while keeping his distance as the younger officer pounded his leg with his fist in frustration. You know that he's just trying to rile you up. No shit, I know that. Attacking anything that got in his way, which was thankfully mostly himself at that point. No doubt the young officer would be feeling it by tomorrow, but it was the frustration he was feeling now that he was trying to beat. It doesn't help that he's fucking right. And so what if he is? Lent credence by the gray flecks in his mustache, the older cop tried to impart some wisdom on his younger partner. You think that's an easy life? When if he gets out, he'll have to explain to his boss why he got locked up in the first place. And out on the streets, there's us, not to mention other crooks out for his blood. Jail's probably the only place someone like him can rest easy without wondering when he's going to wake up dead. Now that the excitable youth had calmed down, with the air of a mentor he laid a hand on his junior's shoulder and showed that his steeled exterior could still operate gently. I know it sounds fucking trite when you see all your hard work go down the drain. But take it from me, I've been on this beat a long time and I've seen faces come and go in that back seat. And you know what? I've outlived all of them. I know Pops, the younger man sighed into his knees, just got to let it out sometimes, you know. I do, the veteran grunted, and better here than in a courtroom or somewhere where you'd attract Grim. With a hearty slap on the back, he nearly knocked the young police officer over as he turned around and headed for their vehicle. But you call me Pops one more time, and you won't be worried about this punk nor Grim neither, Capich. I ain't your daddy, boy. Geez, you're pretty scary sometimes, old man, you know that. Rubbing the spot on his back which hurt more than all his blows combined, the younger cop moved to follow his partner with a grin on his face. But his senior didn't rise to the bait a second time, just standing stock still in front of the squad car's rear window with his back turned. Boy, poorer, sir, what's the matter? Stride quickening upon realizing he couldn't see his boss's reflection in the rear window. Ah, shit. Don't tell me he got my spare set of handcuff keys. I could have sworn I left them in the front glove box. No kid, that ain't it, with a sigh that betrayed his many years on the job, the senior officer reached forward and opened the door they had just closed on their captive. I made sure to double check you on that. Course, don't matter much now. When he did, a small flood of crimson cascaded off the running board and onto the pavement. What the? Time for another lesson, kid. With reluctance, the old man stepped out of the way of the grisly view inside their back seat. Whereas they might have been worried about a broken nose and some complaining, neither of these mattered with the now silent head detached from the crook's body. Sometimes you can do everything right and still end up cleaning up someone else's shit. Clarity. Awakening was a journey. She arrived on a fall breeze and landed upon crisp leaves not yet shed. The salt spray of crashing waves roused her, and the soft earth under her head was the bed on which she lay. She knew this place without even having to open her eyes. She didn't want to open them. Having been there too many times before, she knew the only thing that awaited her was a memory carved in stone and an epitaph that wouldn't fade. But that's not what greeted her when at last she wiped away the dust of sleep. The tombstone of her dead mother was nowhere to be found, only death itself manifested in an endless black expanse that smothered the familiar cliffside and blanketed the broken moon. Her feet treading on grass that was blood red. Hello? There was her voice. But it was see-through like her hands and feet. Where was she? What was she? Lost. Dead. Trapped. Surging forward, she wanted to scream, to run. She ran, and she screamed for someone, anyone, anything else in that field of crimson blades. If this was hell, why did it have to be draped in her favorite colors? If it wasn't hell, she would not have grown tired, sunk to her knees, and crushed the hundreds of blood-red strands beneath her dead weight. Why her hands dug deep into the moist soil, exhuming what lay buried there. Why is this happening? Because. Soul giving a leap, her body was too tired to follow, and she could only look up at the sound of a voice at long last. How long had it been? Long enough for her hands to become part of the burgundy muck and grow roots. But she tore them up and surged to her feet with a sudden and insatiable desire to live. Not for herself, but for this voice which called her with reason. Because the voice chimed like a death knell at the same time her heart stopped. I killed you. The debate was over. This was the underworld, and here was her personal tormentor staring down at her with that unflinching black mask, which seemed to congeal from the background, and sword which smiled a Cheshire grin at her plight. No. She denied with whatever conviction her corpse had left just before that snickering sword reaped her. Not giving up on the precious commodity without a fight, she reached behind her back with unreasonable hope and drew forth crescent rose. As surprised as she, her fox-masked tormentor was batted away as she countered with a desperate swing. But he was quick to recover, and she was not. All her movements felt sluggish and weak. Maybe she still had her vaunted speed, but nothing was quicker than death, nothing was so agonizingly slow as the kitsune demon toyed with her, snipped at her heavy arms and legs. Eventually, soon. Blades clanged silently in that twilight while the wine-colored grass danced to rhythm of the fighters. She blocked another strike, but he was too strong, and her defense would not last. Why? She eked out the question, another breath, another second. Because. Deadlocked and face to face. He told her, but the words died before they could reach. Why? She demanded, contested the foregone conclusion, and pushed against the immeasurable weight. Because emotion she wasn't expecting flooded back, but it only fueled her drive. Tell me. Tears crashed as the blades fell against one another time and time again. This was it, the end. One of them would falter. It had already happened. Crescent rose carved through the black mask and the midnight behind it. And for the first time in what felt like a century she could see sun at last peeking through that slit she carved. But she couldn't look at it. She couldn't tear herself away from what lay behind the mask. Because the answer escaped through his fingers as he rose and his hand fell by the wayside. It was. Nothing. Ruby. Huh? Ruby said, looking around. She was in the training arena with other students. None of it had been real. She had been daydreaming about him. Are you okay? The young girl looked over at her sister, who had been the one to pull her away from her daydream, or daymare more like. I'm fine, Ruby lied. Just thinking, she smiled before going back to what she was supposed to be doing. Right now she was supposed to be watching two students spar. Those two students this time around being John Ark and Cardin Winchester. Ruby cringed at the combination. Poor John. Ruby liked John. He was fun to talk to, he was always helpful to her in any way he could be, she always had fun even when they had study sessions over what they learned in the leadership workshop class. All in all, John Ark was a good guy in her opinion. He just really sucked when it came to fighting. They had been in Beacon for a few weeks now, and John had yet to win a single fight in combat class. And since he was aiming to be a huntsman and attending the best huntsman school in Valewell, that was an issue. True enough, Professor Goodwich was calling the fight, and Cardin had indeed beaten his fellow team leader with ease from the looks of their aura levels. The blonde professor was doing the usual by pointing out flaws on both sides and ways that they could improve themselves. John's lecture was noticeably longer than Cardin's. With her words of wisdom given, she dismissed the class for lunch. Which brought her attention back to Yang, who still had a concerned look on her face. I asked if you were okay. Her older sister repeated. Why yeah, Ruby reassured, having come to her senses. Just some stuff that's on my mind is all. Yang gave her a grim look as she had a feeling on what the girl was thinking about. It had been a few weeks since the encounter with the assassins in Vale, and they hadn't heard anything about them. It was like they had gone silent completely. But none of them were fooled. For Ruby, the problem with the assassins was their effect. Every time she had been in the city, she could see the looks of frustration the police had. As if they couldn't catch this abstract crook. As if Roman wasn't bad enough. But the civilians were a different story altogether. There was this sense office that Ruby couldn't understand. She was sure that they had been murdering people since they had last met. The problem was who they were. It was never put in the news, and the people were way too relaxed for it to be normal. It baffled the young girl. Because if the assassins were indeed still killing people, then why was no one on edge about it? Clarity. Bryce nearly being spotted and exposed, an accidental electrical fire caused by tampering with streetlights, 5-car traffic accident resulting from aforementioned actions, and hiding his quirked eyebrow behind the numerated report in front of him, the stern man could not disguise the curiosity in his voice. And an incident involving a possibly malevolent cat. With all due respect, sir. A single hand gesture from the man quelled the objection that was forthcoming, the petitioner lowering his masked face back down so it was level with the tatami mats. Losing track of the target and then letting him be apprehended by the authorities, letting the tablet fall with a small clatter against his desk, the man brought to bear his arched eyebrow over the 4 black-clad assassins prostrate in front of him. And yet you still somehow completed your mission. His sneer betrayed his next words. Good job, Kasai. I'm glad our decision to return you to the field was not in vain. Bowing his head that inch left between himself and the floor, Kitsune took this odd bit of praise with the barest smidge of humility allowed. Of course, it would be nice if one of these days your team could complete a mission without such drama. We will endeavor to improve, Kitsune intoned as if reading off a script plastered to the floor. Perhaps the next mission. Insolent hissed under his breath, but the animosity was not hidden from any of the teenagers. Your next mission will not be nearly so easy. It was meant to be an admonishment, a threat. But to the squad captain, it was like food, and he swallowed it without complaint. It was another mission, another meal to feed the insatiable need inside of him that he couldn't qualify. A fox didn't ask whose pound of flesh it was, didn't think twice before sinking its teeth into the life-giving source. He just chewed through it. Clarity. So. There we were, in the middle of the night, Nora began as she started her story. It was high noon yesterday. Ren corrected after taking a sip of her drink. We were surrounded by Ursai. Nora continued, hissing the last word. You said beolds last time. It was an army of them. Army of 2. But they were no match, and in the end, Ren and I began building our pancake empire that reigned all across Remnant, the hyper girl explained, finishing her story. She keeps waking up in the middle of the night laughing about world conquest. Ren sighed out, looking at the others. I'm thinking it's time we talk to a therapist. Now on any other day Ruby would be completely enraptured in one of Nora's stories, but her mind was preoccupied at the moment. She was focused on John. Her fellow team leader and her first friend at Beacon had a downtrodden look on his face. And Ruby understood. He tried, truly he did. Ruby had seen him many times in the training arena by himself trying to practice and get better with his sword skills. Ruby wanted to approach him to help but felt that it wasn't her place. In fact, she knew that there was someone definitely more suited for the job of helping the blonde squire improve. And she was sitting right next to her. John? Are you okay? Purah asked softly. Huh? John asked, focusing back in on his surroundings, and saw Purah and Ruby looking at him with concern. Oh, yeah. He said quickly, trying and failing to put them at ease. Why? It's just that you seem a little not okay, Ruby commented with a shrug of her shoulders. By now everyone else at the table had turned their attention to the blonde, catching him by surprise. I'm fine, John said hastily. Seriously. Look. He held his thumbs up and laughed lightly, though it was clearly forced. He looked around before something caught his attention. Everyone followed his line of sight to see the members of Team CRDL, standing around a girl with brown rabbit ears jutting from her hair as Cardin laughs at her. Skylark stood in front of her, holding up his hands to his head in a mock interpretation of her rabbit ears. John, Cardin's been picking on you since the first week of school. Purah said, turning away from the scene, as did everyone else. All except Ruby. She watched the team continue to laugh at the girl with narrowed eyes. Who? Cardin Winchester? John asked. Nah, he just likes to mess around. You know, practical jokes. He said, blowing off his partner's statement. He's a bully. Ruby said hostilely, her eyes still trained on the scene. Oh, please. John scoffed. Name one time he's bullied me. He challenged. The time he knocked your books out of your hand. Ren said. The time he opened your shield so you couldn't get through the door, Y supplied. The time he pushed you in a locker and launched it, Yang mentioned, popping a grape into her mouth. I didn't land far from the school. John defended weakly. John, you know if you ever need help, you can just ask. Purah said gently. Ooh. Nora gets up from the table and presents her diabolical plan with a not entirely sane grin. "We'll break his legs." "Not a bad idea," Ruby muttered. "Eyes, really, it's fine. Besides, it's not like he's only a jerk to me. He's a jerk to everyone," John says. "That doesn't make it better," Ruby said, turning away from the scene briefly. Suddenly the laughing grew louder, mixed in with cries of pain. The group turned back to see the rabbit girl crying out as Carden tugged on her ears. "Atrocious. I can't stand people like him." Purr growled. "He's not the only one," Blake mentioned, staring daggers at the bully. "It must be hard to be a faunus," Yang said sympathetically. With that said, no one made a move to do anything about the situation. Such was the norm of the world, as sad as that was. "Hey." Well, almost no one. Carden along with his teammates turned around to see Ruby storming towards them with a vengeance. "Let her go, Carden," Ruby growled. Carden scoffed and simply pulled the faunus's ear tighter. He obviously didn't take her seriously. He got ready to pull again, but stopped when he saw Ruby grab the offending arm's wrist. Carden paused and stared back at the 15-year-old, giving her his most threatening look. Imagine his surprise when she returned the glare tenfold, not backing down at all. "I'll say it again," Ruby hissed. "Let her go." Ruby tightened her hold on his wrist. "Before I make you." Oh, this girl wanted to play. Carden flicked his head slightly and his teammates stood by Carden, intending to intimidate her. But if she was scared of possibly fighting the 4 older boys, she didn't show it. He was scarier, she thought to herself, as she didn't let go of Carden, who hadn't let go of the faunus. Carden eyed the younger girl, calculating. He wasn't intimidated by the cheat even a little bit. Especially with numbers on his side. Though he knew he could beat her in a one-on-one. However. Carden eyed the table she had come from to see Yang. He saw that even Blake, whose head was always in a book, was glaring at him. He saw the invincible women staring him down as well. Nora was giving him a cheerful smile. Wasn't she the girl that used a giant hammer? He just wasn't up for the consequences. For now. "Let's go, guys," Carden dismissed as he released the girl and walked off. He bumped into Ruby as he passed by her, but she didn't even grunt. She refused to give him the satisfaction. After watching them walk out of the cafeteria, she turned back to the rabbit faunus. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The older girl looked at her and gave a soft smile. Slowly she got up and made her way out of the cafeteria. Ruby looked ready to follow, but the girl turned back to her and shook her head. "I'm Ruby," Ruby introduced. "Velvet," the fauna said softly before continuing her walk out. Ruby wanted to follow her, but decided to respect the girl's wishes. Slowly she made her way back to her own table. "I don't know if that was brave or stupid. It's just a faunus. Isn't she the girl that ran into the assassins in the forest?" "I think you're right." The words filtered to her ears, but Ruby didn't care. Her mind was still occupied with the sequence of events that just happened. "Nice going there, Rubes," Yang said jovially as she pulled her sister into a one-armed hug. Stopping bullies whenever she can. All around she saw approving looks from her friends. Even Blake. Only Weiss had remained blank as she continued filing her nails. "Why did you do it?" The others turned to look at Blake. "Why help her?" Ruby looked up at the B of her team. For a brief moment he flashed into her eyes. His emotionless attitude, those bright blue eyes that were so empty, his carelessness from killing someone. "Because I'm a huntress," she stated. "And I wouldn't have the right to call myself one if I saw injustice in front of me and did nothing about it." "Even if she's a faunus?" Blake asked, and there was something in her voice that was low, but Ruby could hear it. What it was, though, she didn't know. What does it matter what she is? Ruby wondered. She's here like the rest of us, doing the best she can. In that moment something changed between Blake and Ruby. Neither of them realized it, but they had become closer, if only slightly. "I still say we break his legs," and with that the moment passed at Nora's comment, sending the group into a conversation about the pros and cons of breaking Carden's legs or bringing general harm to their fellow freshmen. All the while only Purrit and Ruby had noticed the departure of a certain blonde squire. Clarity. Perhaps the director is not the best person for us to bring this idea to. With a hand scratching the chin of his unmasked face, Sai stared straight ahead at the back of his captain, who was marching mechanically down the hallway. "I don't care if nobody believes us," Sasuke grumbled, arms folded over the multitude of scratches littering his arms. "That cat is a new breed of infiltrator class Grim. I'm sure of it." "Aw, I thought it was a Torblee." Exercising her sudden penchant for puns, Sakura ignored the groaned opinions of her teammates. "You're just upset that it liked me better than you. You see? It's insidious." Sai nodded in all seriousness along with his teammates' assessment, which might or might not have been a joke. "Really? Are you still blaming that cute little thing for the whole traffic mess?" "No, just for tripping me on purpose and making me miss. If you couldn't see a bright orange tabby cat, then clearly you shouldn't be blaming the poor thing for your own failings. I'm telling you, it moved in way my faster than an ordinary hose cat. It was almost as fast as stopping short before he mentioned the prior incident. Eventually all three subordinates had their eyes trained on their stoic leader. "I'm calling bull. Naruto, you were on lookout, what do you think?" Stopping suddenly, all three behind him tripped and flailed in their efforts not to run into their captain, as if invisible cats were scrambling under their feet. Watching him intently as he turned only enough for them to see a single eye slit of the mask he hadn't yet removed, they heard his voice as devoid of opinion as ever. "I think that if it gets in your way again, you should kill it." Although, to say this emotionless was a lie. There was a distinct animosity and even cruelty hidden well beneath the surface of this callous statement. They doubted their leader was even aware of it, they doubted their friend was aware of the way he'd let the duty of kitsune overtake his usual mild mannerisms. Over the past weeks they had managed to redeem themselves, both in their own eyes and more importantly, in the eyes of the council. Only two people wouldn't seem to be satisfied no matter what. Their director of operations, Jin, and Naruto himself. While normally reserved, now the boy had sacrificed his usual curiosity and leniency for the sake of the missions of which they'd completed over a dozen successfully. "If you'll excuse me," voice softening almost imperceptibly, he was almost aware of this change overcoming him. More likely, he was aware of his negative impact on his team. They always came first. "I need to stop in the room and fill out some requisition forms. Can't that wait until after dinner?" Adopting her most professional tone, Sakura hoped she wouldn't have to argue with her leader about proper nutrition in his current state. "These need to be in as soon as possible if we are to get new uniforms ordered in time." Chagrined, two of the four looked down and what remained of their stealth suits, the covers of their armor which looked like scratching posts. Sakura was still fixated on their leader until he gave a satisfactory answer. "I will eat later, do not worry." But she was worried. They all were. None more so, perhaps, than the one lurking around the corner. Although, he was the best at concealing both his presence as well as his emotions. The other three lingered a moment longer outside with concerted expressions aimed at the door. "Come on," Sasuke sighed, "we'll get takeout and bring it back to the room. We'll make that idiot eat." Not waiting for acceptance to this plan, Sasuke trudged off tiredly with Sai following. But Sakura stayed, and that was the only thing keeping Itachi from intervening. When she entered the door, he disappeared to give his report. "Naruto." Peeking her head in first, with a lack of immediate verbal denial, Sakura tread into their team's shared billets. "Can I talk to you about something?" "I've taken down all your statements about the possible Torah-class Grim," Naruto sighed wearily, mask finally off and laying on a stack of papers. "The assassins like to do things old school. Some called it being behind on technology, the Atlas branch in particular, they like to think of it as unhackable including my own. I've already submitted copies to both intelligence and R&D, though not sure what good it will do." Blinking at this pessimistic expression, it was more emotion Naruto had admitted to in a long time, but did not satisfy his pink-haired teammate. Neither did the pale face and sunken eyes which lay behind the fox mask reassure her of her captain's mental state. She considered what she was about to propose, wondering if now was the right time to bring up such frivolous concerns. The professional medic said no. The unflinching assassin said yes. The conflicted friend. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about our recent missions." She chided herself as her clearly exhausted leader mustered himself for this excuse, set down his pen, and gave her his undivided attention. "Go ahead, Namikuji." "Actually, sir, I'd prefer to keep this off the record. Given our questionable position, I'd rather not forward this idea without hard evidence." Something for their team's interest only, Naruto understood and conveyed this with a binding nod. "Don't you find them strange?" 6 standard seek and destroy, 3 border patrols and 3 information gatherings, Naruto recited blearily. "No, I do not see anything unusual about them. Although, if you are talking about Director Jin's deliberate sabotage." Wide-eyed, this revelation temporarily superseded importance in Sakura's mind. "You knew?" "Of course I did," back to his usual expressionless delivery, "I needed to be aware of it in order to ensure mission success. I have been relying on Weasel Senpai to recover the information redacted by the director and as a field agent when necessary." Gazing at his hands which had started to tremble from fried nerves, he forced them to still through sheer will alone. "I wish that I did not have to rely on him. Director Jin was correct on one thing. I need to improve." But this thought preoccupying him, Naruto was unprepared as his teammate gently cupped his racked hands with her own. "Naruto, you don't have to take on all this responsibility by yourself. That's the purpose of having a team, so we can share the burden." This action and words induced physical reactions in Naruto that he was unable to explain. He tried to blame the widening eyes and elevated hair trade on his fatigue and susceptibility to the caffeine pills he had just taken. But no rational explanation existed for why he could not meet his teammates' eyes. Except that they reminded him of another pair of eyes filled with emotions he didn't know how to deal with either. Between her and Jin-sama, maybe silver just wasn't his color. I'll keep that in mind. Sakura accepted this with a gentle squeeze and allowed Naruto to retreat from the touch. Now, if that is all. Actually, it isn't. Guiltily after already pushing him so far, Sakura knew this was something that Naruto would want her to say. It was something she wouldn't forgive herself for overlooking. 5 of the 6 assassinations we contracted were for High Junior Shion, taking care of former employees. Sakura frowned as she stood up straight and started pacing the small space their team had been allotted. As an information broker, it strikes me as foolish for someone like Junior to be so careless with associates. It seems to be more than just spring cleaning, more like he's cutting ties with specific people. And this comes at the same time we're sent to keep tabs on Roman Torchwick, whom was foiled in a recent dust robbery while using Junior's goons. This first failure also marks the first time he escalated the scope of his robberies, going from petty crime to an organized raid. Yet, no more aid is coming from Junior, and the dust robberies are now becoming endemic. Not having to force himself to stay awake any longer, now Naruto was practically at the edge of his seat. Do you think he's getting aid from another source? More for confirmation than an actual question, Naruto allowed himself to frown as he mulled over the possibilities. Or is it someone else acting independently? No, too big of a coincidence. Either he's hiring outside help or he's just the agent of a larger conspiracy. What did we find on those border patrols? Sakura asked, leading Naruto's train of thought in the direction she had been wandering down for the past few days. The White Fang recalling not just the border patrols, but the botched mission before that. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he began connecting certain dots that seemed to fit but were too sporadic to call conclusive. They've been getting bold lately. Recent upheaval, new leadership. Though is it because of that? Or because they've also found allies? They stared at one another for a time in which the only thing that could be heard was the ticking of the old-fashioned pendulum clock in the corner. Looking into those cold calculating blue eyes, Sakura was suddenly almost as afraid of them as she was the possibility she put forth. I shall speak to Kakashi about this. To her relief, he turned back to the stack of papers on his desk and directed his emptiness there. And Weasel. No need to worry the hierarchy just yet, but it wouldn't hurt to have others aware of what to look for. And Shiva. The pen once again paused in Naruto's hand as he found himself actually considering the possibility instead of outright dismissal. The fewer people we alert, the better if this turns out to be a waste of time. But Kuma's attention to detail would come in handy, and as difficult as Shiva herself is to work with sometimes, her penchant for gossip might actually be a benefit. The reliance on others stirred something in him that he couldn't identify, but he moved past it in light of focusing on current matters. I'll consider it. It was all she could ask, for him to allow the chance he'd never been given. Now, I really do need to finish these order forms. Boy. Clear me a space so I can set this shit down. Bursting through the door and usurping the solemn air was Sasuke and Sai, both with arms fully laden with plastic containers and armpits stuffed with glass bottles. Sitting at the Spartan room's only table, Naruto narrowed his eyes and tried to find words of objection. But before any excuse could come, he found that his female teammate had already whisked away the reams of papers and tossed them on one of the identical bunk beds. Another blink found a disposable bowl plunked in front of him, condensation clinging to the translucent lid like he found the saliva clinging to the roof of his mouth. What's this? Food? Sasuke grunted, obviously, not caring if it earned the blonde's ire. The kitchen's closed for repairs, so they only had cup-o noodles. And lukewarm drinks, it seems. Taking one of the bottles from her teammate, Sakura scowled lightly at it and the rest of the meager offerings. I believe we have some tinned fish around here somewhere, Sai offered, distributing his own load and wriggling through the tight space to look for the emergency rations. At least that'll give us some protein, Sakura sighed, jabbing the awkwardly broken chopsticks into one of her 2 cups. Hardly the best nutrition, but it was important. This was important, she realized, looking amongst their humble living space and the 4 bodies that occupied it. Like a Renaissance painting, the entirety of their lives fit into that tiny frame. Sakura wished she could take a picture of it, but doing so would also break the moment, so she settled for memorizing all the trivial details. Sai digging through crates of provisions, maneuvering the empty ones around the postage stamp table for use as seats. Sasuke struggling with opening a bottle, not realizing it wasn't a twist-off, but too proud to ask for help. Naruto himself a piece of that original boy who played with the sopping noodles, as if they were a mystery to be solved. Smiling, she hoped that this was just the beginning and not just a memory they would look back at in nostalgia. Clarity. Night fell upon Beacon as all students resided within their rooms. Most of them having drifted off into dreamland while a few remained awake. Ruby was one of those few. But unlike the others who couldn't sleep because of upcoming tests or leadership duties, sleep escaped the young girl for an entirely different reason. Him. Looking back on everything that happened that day and trying to make sense of it left Ruby confused and sleepless. Not to mention, just the teensiest bit scared of closing her eyes. Why, though? Why should she fear a mortal in a mask? Like a hard math problem, she was determined to work out the answer even if it cost her a full 8 hours rest. She would not be afraid of what she did not understand. There were plenty of real things to be scared over. Every day she put her life on the line in this career she'd chosen. She faced down monsters that were the epitome of evil, soulless beasts that wanted nothing more than to feast upon her flesh. Compared to that, what was one man with a sword? John was a man with a sword. Maybe it was because he was just a man, a boy, little older than herself, if she guessed right. Not simply a specter that haunted her dreams, he was a person, one whom others rallied behind. She had seen the way his allies marshaled to his side and could not help comparing them with her own team. They clearly trusted him, more than her own comrades did, if she were to be honest. If she were honest, he wasn't like Grim, her John, or even her salty old Uncle Crow, who had as dim view on humanity as anyone she knew. He was like her. That was what scared her. The knowledge that in each of them was this demon, lurking. And yet, the fact that most people acted like they didn't or worse, simply didn't care was as unfathomable as it was inexcusable. Oh, sure, Ruby knew she had her own darkness buried deep down somewhere under lock and key. But to give in to it was something else. She didn't consider herself strong for resisting its crooked truths. That was just something each of them should be expected to do. In fact, it had come so naturally for so long that she never considered what it might be like to lose to that darkness, to be the one locked away behind those bars. She didn't know what it was like to be the one behind blue eyes. What if Naruto Team 7 meets Team rwby? End here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.